fat people have it more than non-fat people, but like when you hear about like a healthy guy who's like he ran every day and he just dropped dead in his sleep apnea, like it happens to like bad snores and shit, and that's really fucking bad for you, because it's like, imagine if you never got a good night's rest ever your entire fucking life, and it just like, you know, adds up. So like it'll fuck you up.
And that can happen with sleep apnea. That's what. So sleep apnea is. Let's bring it up there.
Yeah, let's get sleep apnea on the board.
Yeah.
Show me sleep apnea. What the hell? Just Steve Harvey.
Things that make my wife wet. Show me sleep apnea. Sleep apnea is a potentially serious sleep disorder in which breathing repeatedly stops and starts. Wow.
Yeah, dude,
so it's kind of like that new button that they have in cars a lot?
Yes. Push to start. If you're push to start and your fucking Nissan Maxima was on the fritz, and you just stopped in the highway, you might get fucking rear-ended, and that's basically suffocating in your sleep. That's a fat man. Yeah. This is a fucking...
What if that was your husband? You just had to make sure you hit the button. He just settles down like you're at a stoplight.
You hear him starting up again? Yeah. Just one big... They replaced one nipple with the stay alive button. Yeah, he's got to pinch it.
And one time, instead, she walks over softly, right?
Yeah.
And you think she's going to go press the button. This is how the movie ends.
Yeah.
And she brings her other hand up and there's just flowers in it, and she sets them on his chest.
Wow.
And she walks out of the room and frees all the women that he's been keeping in the basement.
Oh, so he's also a sex criminal.
And he goes downstairs and tells Grandma, turn on the fan.
Turn on the fan. Yeah. Grandpa Stavros is dead.
And you hear the fans whir up.
Yeah.
And everything is free suddenly.
Yeah. You hear her strangle all the fucking cockatiels. You hear all the birds who were his accomplices in the sex crimes. He trained birds that would he would put suction cup dildos on their heads and they would fly, rape.
Just landing in
Let's take it all the way. Yeah. Let's take the scenario all the way.
Landing in women from just in the air. Just like, oh damn. Somebody's just going for a walk or something.
Yeah, dude. Just getting raped by a fucking toucan.
Dude, one time I was in New York and this lady comes walking up. It was my first time ever there.
Yeah.
And she goes, did you see that? Right? And she kept pointing. And somebody had, I guess, jumped off a building nearby because a lot of people were gathered around.
Goddamn.
You know? And she's like, did you see that? Did you see that? And so I'm looking up there. And then I said, did I see what? And she just showed me her vagina. And she goes, that guy landed it.
So is the... First of all, awesome bit. Awesome bit. You're not thinking about looking at a pussy.
Oh, not at all. She tricked me with the building, and then she goes, that guy landed in my pussy, and showed me her vagina. It made me so scared. Yeah, and I just gotten into the city.
Yeah, dude. You're like, what they told me back in Tennessee was right. Yeah. They're like, what they told me back in the fucking...
And some guy's like, buy 2 cannolis or you'll die in an hour. Like, there was all kind of street mystery going on.
Absolutely.
God, it just got scary.
Now, I wonder what she's thinking there in terms of... First of all, you don't see a lot of female, flashers, which is kind of cool. So salute to her to kind of, bringing the glass ceiling of, sex crime. She's breaking it by flashing her pussy. Because it's hard to get a guy not to want to look at your pussy. Also, you know what I mean? They're up against that. Most guys will at least take a peek, even if they don't want to fuck. Out of curiosity, I'll look at most ladies' pussies just to... All right, I'll take a look.
Yeah.
You know? I mean, I don't know. What did she look like? Was she fucking...
And I like to say cooter, honestly. I do want to say that. I don't mind.
Okay, you want to say cooter?
Yeah, I just don't want...
These are cultural differences.
Well, if somebody could be with their kids or something.
Sure. Okay, you're so
I don't want... Yeah, well, when I imagine, I don't want the kid to be like, hey, Mom, what's up?
Right.
But if Mom's like, the kid's like, hey, Mom,
what about
Muff?
Cooter?
You know?
Cooter's cute.
Yeah. And then Mom be like, Cooter is somebody that works at the gas station.
Right. Yeah.
So, there's a lot more mystery there. Oh, yeah. But I think if you look at a vagina, you almost have to look at it from the bottom. I don't feel like if you're looking directly on, it's like... Right. It could be any age, right?
That's true. Yeah, head on. You don't see the wear and tear unless it's the
I don't feel like you want to. It's like
you need a reverse drone shot, basically. It's flying up.
Right. It just shocked me. I've never seen a woman, and it was like reverse magic, like it landed in my...
Yeah. That's also really fun, too, to say that he landed, because what is she saying there?
Right.
That it caught her, or is her cooter so tight that maybe that's what exploded his brain. You know what I mean? It's like it wasn't the sidewalk. That's how I can't say cooter, I'm sorry. It feels weird.
It's just for me, too.
I could say it's not bad, it's probably worse, right?
I mean, it's all fine. I just think of different places listening,
Sure.
Or different environments.
Muff? How do you feel about muff?
Some people used to say that dussy. People used to say all the time, that dussy. Yeah, what else? Cooter,
Gash is a twat.
Oh,
It's
yeah.
more British. You're right. You do go through it. I'm sorry that looks like it pained you to hear twat.
I wonder...
You have a real distaste for everything but cooter.
Yeah.
Interesting.
I wonder if cooter just sounds more manageable. It sounds like an animal you're trying to hunt.
It's cooter for sure. It could be a Pixar character named Cooter.
There he is. Look at her. Cooter.
That's awesome.
Yeah. No, and she has on heels,
Yeah, of course. Like a squirrel.
Yeah.
Like a squirrel in makeup.
But then nowadays she comes on stage, she's like, I'm a man.
Right.
Whoa,
Yeah. Oh, that's interesting. Look, Cooter, named after a pussy. Now he's trans. Or she's trans, I guess. A trans squirrel named Cooter. That would, honestly, the odds of that being in a Pixar movie are pretty high. We're going to get a trans squirrel in a Pixar movie.
The odds of that being the next lead in, Lethal Weapon 11.
I don't know. Mel might throw his body in front of that. I mean, I guess as long as it's not a Jewish trans person, he might be down.
That's true.
Do we know his stance on
Jews?
No, Jews we got. That's pretty well done.
You think?
I think so. I think there's room. I think we got Mel on Jews pretty nicely. I think you didn't even have to hear his comments. Just watch Passion of the Christ. It's like, this is awesome, dude. You learned a whole language, ancient language, to be anti-Semitic, because that gives you cover. When you learn the ancient language and bring it back from the dead, he's just like, no, I'm trying to be real. If that was in English, he'd be like, Jesus, tone it down on the Jews. But a different place, so respect to Mel for that one.
Yeah, look, I'm not gonna say I bought some of the merch.
Some of the unauthorized merch.
Yeah, huh? Yeah, some of the bootleg. Stavros, thanks for coming, man.
Yeah, dude.
You guys, and really, I just think about my mom.
Sure.
Because she watches the show, but yeah. So you started out. I know you're out of Maryland,
yeah,
right? And is that weird being like a white person in Maryland? If I were in Baltimore.
Yeah. I mean, look, I grew up Greek. I'm Greek.
And so Greek. Are y'all? Where are you guys? Because I know it goes.
Sure. On the race rankings.
Yeah.
Well, as an ethnic white, it's like, it's kind of the best. I kind of consider it the best of both worlds, because it's like, we got our own cuisine. I speak a different language. We got a place to vacate. Like the beaches are fucking sick. Weren't here for slavery. Huge.
Really?
That's huge. Yeah. No, my family came from '82.
Which,
like,
what, 1382?
Yeah.
There's slavery even happened.
You're so right. Yeah, I mean,
I'm saying they never found the boats.
Yeah, I think there are some boats. Actually, the boats are not the problem.
Really bring up a couple.
So you think Amistad was like just kind of it was like fictional, or it was like a potential reimagining?
No, I just think it was like, look, I love Amistad.
Yeah.
You know, I'm just saying I think some things are up for interpretation.
It'd be funny if you thought slavery happened like the way it was in Django, if that's the only thing you accepted, because it was the one where the slaves win. You're like, yeah, it was them taking advantage of us.
Yeah.
That would be funny. That'd be funny if there's like a racist guy who's like, slavery didn't happen except in the way that Quentin Tarantino said.
Yeah.
And that's how it happened. And we actually need reparations. Like, that would be a fun twist on it.
Well, the way the world is now, I feel like somebody could see a movie, and that's I mean, I guess I don't know what they teach in school, so yeah. I feel like it's like some people, you get all your information off of one YouTube video, and that is your fuel.
Dude,
that's your fuel for the rest of your life.
You're good, dude. You're all set on learning on that topic.
Yeah.
It's real dangerous. But...
Do you think you would have owned a slave or not?
Interesting. Let's see here.
I don't know if this conversation is going to be.
Yeah, we probably should move. Yeah, we should do like an abrupt cut. I'm going to say no, though, before we do. Just for the record, no, and then we can move on.
Okay. I'm okay with I mean, I wouldn't.
Yeah. Me neither. So we're clear. And folks, for those on listening, I didn't do air quotes. I'm not saying anybody else did, but I wouldn't.
Yeah.
No air quotes. Like, I'm just gonna put it that way.
Oh, air quotes are the new shackles, huh?
I don't know about that.
Here's my old ball and air quotes right here.
Yeah, dude. Yeah, absolutely.
No, look, man, I believe in freedom, man.
That's such an awesome take. When we're talking about slavery, it's like me, I'm on the freedom side. It's like, I'm with you too.
Look here, buddy.
Yeah. But it was not, I would say the key part about, again, going to like the white ethnic group is if you weren't a part of slavery and you grow up in like a majority black city, that is a fun little like get at it being accused of racism free card, where it's like I 100%, like when they're making fun of the white trash kid whose family came over here in Ireland 300 years ago,
who couldn't afford food, who probably also couldn't afford a slave.
Right, no chance, and no way, but he was around, we don't know what he was up to. He doesn't have the papers. I know for a fact some Stavros Halkias 300 years ago was on a beach like fishing or something.
Fishing for what though? Black cod.
Black cod or cock?
Cod.
With a D, okay, yeah. No, I don't think so. More maybe like octopus.
Just saying.
Calamari, shrimp or two.
It just depends on what he was trying to pull out.
That's true. Yeah, no, they have
a black cod.
Well, what's interesting about Greek racism is that they don't even they don't have a term like. Don't get me wrong, in Greece, Greek people are racist. There's plenty of Greek people that are racist, but there's not even like a term for like black guy. They call it's all lumped into like Arabs. They consider black people just because that's old school Greek racism, because it's
the original stuff. Is that the original?
Because the Ottoman Empire took over Greece in like the 13 or 1400s, and they got our asses good for like 500 years.
Y'all were slaves?
I mean, yeah, pretty much. Not like in the, but like in a vassal sense, where it's like these motherfuckers just came over. We were second-class citizens in our own country, kind of thing.
Oh yeah.
But
I've been a lot of people, Yugoslavians too.
For sure, no, absolutely. The Ottomans had a nice little run there.
And all they got there was that piece of furniture.
Yeah, off the strength of the furniture, they were like, what happened is they would have real tiny little Turks. They would hollow out. It was they used our own move about the Trojan horse. They would hollow out these Ottomans. Little Turkish midget in there pops out in the middle of the night, just fucking slits everyone's throat. They were smart. You gotta give them credit.
Slits their throat. Yeah, they're little guy.
They're just a little guy, nice with the knife though, nice with the centaur.
That'd be crazy. The smallest ninja.
Yeah, dude.
So tiny.
Real little.
So ninja.
So yeah, that's a nice. I would love that's representation right there.
This episode is brought to you by BetterHelp. That's right, BetterHelp. Because we've all had moments where we're not serving our best self to the world. Sometimes you notice you're going through, you're like, what's going on with me? And your answer is, I don't know. And that may be
The book and this talk is based on my work as a family physician, which I did for 20 years. And 7 of those years, I was also medical coordinator of the palliative care unit at Vancouver Hospital, looking after terminally ill people dying of cancer, neurological diseases, and so on. And what I found in all those years, learned all those years, what I had not been taught in medical school, is that who gets sick and who doesn't is not accidental. That although we tend to think on cancer and multiple sclerosis, which I mentioned last night, or rheumatoid arthritis, or chronic asthma, psoriasis, eczema, colitis, Crohn's disease, any number of chronic illnesses is somehow random events that unfortunately and mysteriously strike a person. And occasionally we think that we can explain the cause by the lifestyle of the individual, like smoking, of course, and its connection to lung cancer. But other than that, we think that these diseases are either mysterious and unexplainable misfortunes, or they are caused by people's genes. And what I found out, quite on the contrary, that who got sick and who didn't wasn't random, and that there were certain identifiable patterns, certain personality traits and behavior, ways of behaving, that people unwittingly, without knowing it, unintentionally, but they brought the disease on themselves. And that wasn't their fault. They didn't know what they were doing, as you will see. But since we're talking about caregivers, and let me tell you one little fact, that, and since the book was published, which was about 10 years ago now, I think, or 9 years ago, there's been so much more evidence tending in the same direction. The one bit of evidence about caregivers is that there's a structure at the end of our DNA, our chromosomes. Chromosomes is the strands where our DNA is located in our cells, in the nucleus of our cells. And these strands of chromosomes have at the end a structure called a telomere. A telomere is like the glue at the end of my shoelace to keep the strands from fraying, to keep it together. When we're born, telomeres are a certain length. And as we get older, gradually they shorten as we age, and until at the end of our life they become unraveled, at which point so do we. Now, they looked at but it's a mark of aging, in other words. Now, they looked at the telomeres of mothers looking after chronically ill children. And they found that these women in their 30s and their 40s, their telomeres were 10 years shorter than their chronological age would have predicted. In other words, the chronic stress of caregiving aged them by 10 years. Now, that doesn't mean, of course, that we shouldn't care for children or for other people that require our support. But it does mean that how we give care and what kind of support we get makes a huge difference to our health. And that's what my topic is about this morning. So I said that there were certain patterns of being and behavior and psychological relating that are associated with chronic illness. And again, when I say chronic illness, I mean everything, virtually everything. What these patterns were that I saw, I'll identify, or at least I'll illustrate for you by means of newspaper clippings that I'll read for you. As I give this talk, by the way, my advice is that you relate it to yourself. They don't just see it as an academic exercise or as a storytelling, but just see to what extent you recognize these patterns in yourself. So the first clipping here is by a woman who writes the article herself. These are all from the Globe and Mail. And she's diagnosed with breast cancer. Her name is Donna. So she's diagnosed with breast cancer. And her doctor's name is Harold. Her husband's name is Hai. And Donna is the second wife. The first wife died of breast cancer. Now Donna, the second wife, is diagnosed with it. And so Donna writes, Harold tells me that the lump is small, and most assuredly not in my lymph nodes. Unlike that of Hai's first wife, whose cancer had spread everywhere by the time they found it. You're not going to die, he reassures me. But I'm worried about Hai, I say. I won't have the strength to support him. Now what do you know is, her first and automatic thought is, how can I support my husband emotionally as I'm dealing with a potentially fatal illness? So this compulsive and automatic concern for the needs of others while ignoring your own is a major risk factor for chronic illness. The other clippings I will read you are obituaries, all from the Globe and Mail. Obituaries are fascinating because they tell us not only about the person who died, but also about what we as a society value in other people. And often what we value in other people is exactly what kills them in the first place. You heard the expression, the good die young? They do. And there's reasons for it. A lot of you are heaving a sigh of relief. Okay, I don't have to worry about myself then, you're saying. But listen to these obituaries. This one is a doctor who died at age 55. And I'm talking here about people who died before their time. This guy dies at age 55 in Toronto of cancer. The obituary says, and this is written as if it was a good thing, never for a day did he contemplate giving up the work he so loved at Toronto's Sick Children's Hospital. He carried on with his duties toward his year-long battle with cancer, stopping only a few days before he died. Now, think about that one. If you're diagnosed with cancer, or if a friend of yours was diagnosed with cancer, would you say to him and her, hey buddy, here's what you do. Go back to work tomorrow. And all the time that you're getting chemotherapy and radiation and whatever else you're going through, just work every day until you die. So this compulsive and rigid identification with duty, role, and responsibility rather than the needs of the self is a major risk factor for illness. The next obituary is written by a husband about his wife, Naomi, who died at age 55 also of cancer. And he writes, in her entire life, she never got into a fight with anyone. The worst she could say was phooey or something else along those lines. She had no ego. She just blended in with the environment in an unassuming manner. Now, the suppression of, in other words, she never got angry with anybody. The repression of healthy anger is a major risk factor for illness. It actually suppresses the immune system for reasons I will tell you later. So there's basically 3 ways of dealing with anger. One is to repress it, like this woman did. So these are the people that are always nice. You know, they're always nice. I worry about being nice people. The other way is to give in to it and to act it out, to go into rages. That's also unhealthy. The repression of anger leads to autoimmune disease and cancer. When you're raging all the time, that increases your risk of heart disease and strokes. So in the aftermath, the studies have shown that in the aftermath of a rage episode, your risk of a heart attack doubles for the next 2 hours. Then there's the healthy expression of anger, or the healthy processing of anger, which most of us don't know how to do. We either do the one or we do the other. I'll talk to you about healthy anger later. But how do we deal with anger has a crucial effect on our health. And this guy writes, you know, she had no ego. She just blended in with the environment in an unassuming manner. This is supposed to be a good thing. My wife's name is Ray, and she's an artist, and it's one of her paintings that provided the detail here on the cover and the color scheme for the cover for this book. And sometimes I say to Ray, you know, we've been married 42 years. I go, well, why can't you blend in with the environment in an unassuming manner? But Ray's done her psychological work, and she's read my book, and she's also seen the studies. You know, there was a study just 4 or 5 years ago presented at a major medical conference. They looked at 1,700 women over a 10-year period. And over a 10-year period, out of these women, those who were unhappily married and suppressed their feelings were 4 times as likely to die as those who were also unhappily married but expressed their feelings. So the issue wasn't happy marriage or unhappy marriage. The issue was, did the woman express herself or did she not?
Yeah, DoorDash.
So
For
this point of
Saul.
my talk, this permits me to reassure the men in the audience that the next time you think your wife is a bitch, you should be glad about it. Now, I'll read you one more of these. I'll read you a couple more of these obituaries. This is a mother in Calgary who died in her early 50s, again, cancer. Just look at this.
Oh, that's
A master with multitasking. She juggled several hockey
Thank you.
practices, school board, orchestra, and other extracurricular activities. June 2005 brought terrible news to this mother of 3 by now president of the Parents Council at Western Canada College. Emergency surgery revealed metastatic cancer. She refused the cloak of illness. She did not give up on any of her roles. You know, she had all these roles, and they were more important than who she was. She even continued her 5 a.m. bicycle trips around the nearby reservoir. Now imagine that when you're getting chemotherapy. She enrolled in a life coaching course, and upon graduation from the Adler School, she initiated Living Out Loud, a group for women with cancer. That's very typical of people who get chronic disease. And finally, another physician who dies of cancer. And again, how the obituary writes something that's clearly, when you look at it, is self-destructive, but the person didn't realize it, and neither does the individual who writes the obituary. Sidney and his mother had an incredibly special relationship, a bond that was apparent in all aspects of their lives until her death. As a married man with young children, Sidney made a point to have dinner with his parents every day, as his wife Rosalind and their 4 kids waited for him at home. Sidney would walk in, greeted by yet another dinner to eat and to enjoy. Never wanting to disappoint either woman in his life, Sidney kept eating 2 dinners a day for years until gradual weight gain began to raise suspicions. Okay? So that this poor man suffered under the belief that, number 1, he was responsible for how everybody else felt, and number 2, he must never disappoint anybody. So he actually couldn't say to his mother, you know, Mom, I got amazing news. I got 4 kids. And I don't have dinner with them most of the time. Nor could he say to his wife, you know, Rosalind, I'm very close with my mom. She needs my support. So once or twice a week, I'm going to have dinner with her. He just tried to please everybody all the time. And this need to please everybody all the time, it'll kill you. And for reasons I will tell you. And these reasons are not psychological. They're physiological. They have to do with the body, the immune system. You can't separate the mind from the body. And the problem with my profession, the medical profession, is that we make 2 separations that are actually, in life, impossible to make. One is that we separate mind from body. We think that people's emotional lives are somehow separate from their physiology. Completely false assumption, unscientific, refuted by all the research, and yet if you go to a doctor, I mean, I know some of you here have had autoimmune illnesses, for example. So ask yourself, when you've been to the physician with your rheumatoid arthritis, your joint being inflamed, or some other rheumatic condition, did anybody ever ask you about your childhood? Anybody ever ask you about your stresses in your life? Anybody ever ask you about your marriage? About how you relate to your work? About how you look after yourself and how you don't? Likely not. Likely what they did is they said, you got this illness, we don't know why you got it, and here are the pills. So they'll give you a medication to suppress the inflammation, Or they'll give you a medication because autoimmune disease, the immune system attacks the body itself, so we give you a medication to suppress the immune system itself. Or we'll give you cortisol or some kind of other steroid. But that's all we do. We don't talk about the life factors that may have contributed to the onset of the illness. And I can guarantee you that any of you here who've had chronic illness of any kind, you're going to recognize yourself in this talk. Completely and 100%. And you're going to wonder, why didn't anybody say this to me before? Because in the West, when I say the West, I mean the dominant Western culture, unlike Aboriginal cultures, unlike the traditional medicines of China or India or native traditions around the world, we separate the mind from the body. So we treat only the body, unless you have mental illness, in which case we still separate the mind from the body. And the other thing we separate is the individual from the environment. As I said to you last night, those of you that were there, you can't separate people from their environment. People are shaped by the environment. And in lifelong, in interaction with the environment, it's how human beings live. Now let me give you 3 examples of that. Why you can't separate people from the environment. It's been shown now, for example, that children whose parents are stressed are much more likely to have asthma. Now, not controversial. Several studies have shown that. So in polluted areas where there is more asthma, it's the kids of parents who are stressed who are most likely to have the asthma. Now, most doctors have never heard about that. And if they did, they can't explain it. And yet it's so obvious, you see. Those of you that have asthma, anybody had asthma here before you know? Okay. You were given 2 kinds of inhalers if you had asthma. One inhaler is probably called Ventolin, and its job is to open up the airways. Because what happens in asthma is you get the spasm of the muscles that surround the airways. So you get this narrowing of the tube through which air has to pass into the lungs. So you're wheezing and whistling and laboring your breathing. And the other inhaler you got would have been a steroid to suppress the inflammation, the swelling, and the inflammatory debris that clutters up the airway. So you get 2 inhalers. One is called a bronchodilator to dilate, open up the airway. The other is to suppress the inflammation. Now, what are these inhalers based on? The inhaler that opens up the airway is a copy of adrenaline. And the inhaler that opens up, that suppresses the inflammation, is a copy of cortisol. Serve us. What are adrenaline and cortisol? They're stress hormones. Exactly. In other words, we're giving asthmatics stress hormones, the same stress hormones that are made by their own adrenal glands when they're stressed. All that's happened is that their own stress response mechanisms have been exhausted. And now we have to give them stress hormones from the outside. Now guess what? If you're rheumatoid arthritis or lupus, what will they give you? Cortisol, the stress hormone. Shouldn't we be asking ourselves that if we're treating people with stress hormones, whether or not there might be connection between stress and their disease? Now, of course, why the children of parents who are stressed? Because the parents' stresses actually program the physiology of the child. Because you can't separate the individual from the environment. And this is true all our lives. A study of women in Australia, 500 women, 550 women, with lumps in their breasts that were of sufficient concern as to require a biopsy. Now, they had these biopsies, but before the results came back, they also had a psychological interview or questionnaire. It turns out after the results came back that if a woman had had a significant stressful incident in her life just prior to the onset of that lump, that by itself has 0 effect on whether or not that lump was cancerous. Similarly, if a woman was emotionally isolated, that also had 0 effect. But if a woman was emotionally isolated and had a major stressor, the risk of that lump being cancerous was 9 times as great as the average. Now, the medical doctors writing the study couldn't understand this one either, because they said, how does 0 and 0 add up to 9? You see? Because we don't understand the connection between individuals and the environment. Now, here's the deal. If I were to act inappropriately towards you right now, if I were to stress you right now, physically or emotionally, you'd have 3 healthy options. But, well, no, I won't go to that right now. If I were to stress you right now, what would happen is that stress wouldn't just be in your head, it would be in your whole body. You know, your heart rate would go up, your nervous system would be firing off all kinds of impulses, your adrenal glands would be pouring adrenaline and cortisol so that you could escape or fight back. These are the flight or fight hormones. And so your body would be in a different state physiologically in a split second in order to help you fight to escape. That's good. So in the short term, the stress hormones help you fight or to escape. But what do they do in the long term? In the long term, the stress hormones deplete your body, suppress your immune system, give you heart disease, high blood pressure, give you ulcers, thin your bones. Okay? Now, what would happen if you were stressed? Something happened that was stressful to you. And you're sitting there all upset. And your body's in a state of imbalance and upset. But somebody that you trust came along and said, hey friend, I see that you're not feeling well, I see that you're upset. Puts a hand on your shoulder and says, hey, do you want to talk about it? Now, what would happen to your body right away? Yeah, so it would relax. You take a deep breath. Your brain would get oxygen. You start thinking more clearly. Your heart rate would slow down. Your blood pressure diminish. The stress hormones abate in your system, and you go back into a healthy balance. All because somebody said, "Hey, buddy, do you want to talk about it?" Those women that had been stressed but were emotionally alone, the stress hormone acted on their system for months. That's why they were more likely to get cancer. It's really straightforward. In other words, again, the physiology of one individual can't be separated from the psychological and social environment. And finally, at the end of life, A study in a major medical journal a few years ago showed that amongst elderly couples, when one of them is hospitalized, what do you suppose happens to the other one? They get sick. In other words, the risk of illness goes up in the other one when the one is hospitalized. Why? Because our immune systems are not isolated from our psychological, emotional, social relationships. You can't separate the mind from the body, and you can't separate the individual from the environment. So how this works, I'll tell you in a few minutes, but I'll just illustrate it with a disease I'm quite interested in, because, again, medical science says we don't know the cause of it, and I think that it's only because we're not looking. And I'm talking about a rare condition called ALS, amyotrophic lateral sclerosis, which is a degenerative condition of the nervous system that leaves you very rapidly, completely paralyzed. Your mind is intact, but your body's paralyzed, and in the end you can't breathe, and you die of respiratory failure. And right now, there's a court case with somebody with ALS who wants the right to medical suicide. And you remember Sue Rodriguez in Victoria who went through the same thing, and her case was rejected in the Supreme Court. So it's a very dire disease, and it carries a terrible prognosis, and most people who get it are dead within a few years. And it strikes otherwise healthy people. So a woman came to me for a second opinion about 12 years ago now. Actually referred to me by my friend Gordon Newport, a psychologist. And her story was that she'd been diagnosed with ALS by one of the leading experts in the condition in British Columbia, or in the world actually. But she didn't want to accept the diagnosis. She wanted me to tell her that it was only stress. Well, it was ALS, but it was also stress. Her story was that she was a teacher and a vice principal at an elementary school in lower mainland of BC, in Richmond. And she found at a certain point that she could no longer hold the pen in her hands because her fingers just wouldn't obey her brain's commands. She also began to experience difficulty walking. Now, you would think if that occurred to you, you would very urgently seek a medical opinion, not her. What she did is she'd get up for months. She would get up at 5:30 every morning, slowly get herself dressed, of course, because her fingers had trouble pulling zippers. She'd drive herself to school, walk into school at 7:30 with her troubled gait. She would clutch the chalk in her clenched fist and painstakingly scrawl the day's lesson on the board for the students. Teach the whole day, go home, stay up late at night to prepare the next day's lesson. Everything was slow for her, you see. And next morning, get up at 5:30. And she did that until she could no longer walk. Now, or barely. Now, is she alone in this? Not at all. Everybody I've ever looked at with ALS has got exactly the same personality and the same behavior pattern, without exception. Without any exception. Doesn't matter what I interviewed or read about. In writing this book, I also looked at the medical literature. And in 1970, there was a study at Yale University Medical School about ALS patients by two psychiatrists who wrote the following. These patients, they invariably evoked admiration and respect from all staff who came into contact with them. Characteristic was their attempt to avoid asking for help. Hard, steady work without recourse to help from others was pervasive. There seemed to have been habitual denial, suppression, or isolation of fear, anxiety, and sadness. So no expression of negative emotion, so-called. Some spoke gradually of their deterioration, casually, like it didn't matter, or did so with engaging smiles. Now then I looked up the biography of Gehrig, after whom the disease is named in North America. Now those of you who are old enough might know that Lou Gehrig was a great baseball player, played for the New York Yankees, and in the 1930s. And he set a record for a number of hits by a New York Yankee that was only broken 2 years ago by Derek Jeter. So that record stood for 80 years. Now Gehrig set another record that stood for nearly 60 years, and that was consecutive games played. So he never missed a game. Now, did he never miss a game? And he was called the Iron Horse. I didn't know about this before I read his biography. I just knew he died of ALS. Let's look at what happened to him. Well, same thing. He was known as the Iron Horse because he never missed a game, and he didn't never miss a game because he was never sick. He was a human being. He had flus and colds like everybody else. Furthermore, being an athlete, he was injured. At one point, his hands were x-rayed, and it turned out that his fingers had been fractured 17 separate times. And each time he would play through the injury. And his teammates would describe him as grimacing like a maddened monkey in agony as he fielded the ball, but he never missed a game. And yet, when a teammate of his, a young rookie, gets sick with a flu illness, and he can't play, and the manager's really upset with the guy, Gary says, what on earth are you talking about? He's sick, he can't play. Takes the rookie home to his own house, where he lived with his mother. His mother puts this rookie into Gary's own bed. Lou sleeps on the living room couch as his mother nurses his kid back to health. And he himself never missed a game, until he could no longer walk. Now, this is typical with everybody with ALS. Are we blaming patients for causing their own illness? Well, no, we're not, because it's not deliberate. It's not deliberate. These are unconscious patterns. So let me give you an example from my personal life. Where my mother's 78, she was in a nursing home because she had a genetic illness called muscular dystrophy, and she could no longer walk, move her arms much. Mentally, of course, she was completely with it. She died at age 82. And by this time, she was a widow, and she had to be in a nursing home. Now, one afternoon, I'm visiting her in a nursing home, and as I'm walking down the hall of the nursing home, I have a bit of a limp, just a slight limp. The reason I had a limp is because I had arthroscopic surgery that morning on one of my knees, that surgery which was minimally invasive, and it just cut out a piece of a cartilage, which I incurred because I used to jog on cement, and I didn't pay attention to the fact that it hurt jogging on cement. I missed a lecture in medical school about the relationship between pain and tissue damage, so that I didn't know this is a bad thing. So I continued to jog on cement, tore cartilage, surgery that morning, that afternoon, bit of a limp. When I get to my mother's room, I open the door, and my limp disappears. And I walk into her room with a perfectly normal gait, greet her, we visit. I walk out again in a balanced way, and then I close the door behind me, and I start limping again. Now, what do you suppose I was doing? Anyone? Taking care of her, not wanting her to worry, yeah. But here's the thing about my mother. She was 78. She had survived the Second World War. She had survived the Nazi genocide, the death of her parents in Auschwitz. She survived communist dictatorship, the Hungarian Revolution in 1956, emigration to Canada with 2 adolescent boys and my father, the birth of a child in Canada when she was 39 in a new country, the whole immigration experience. Do you think she could have handled she was a mentally and emotionally very strong person, do you think she could have handled the fact that her middle-aged son had a bit of a limp the afternoon of the arthroscopic surgery? Had I thought about it, I would not have suppressed my limp, but the point is I didn't think about it. It went back to my very first year of life. When I was 2 months old, when the German army marched into Budapest, and my mother phones the pediatrician to say, would you please come and see Gabor because he's crying all the time, the day after the invasion. And the pediatrician says, of course I will come, but I should tell you, all my Jewish babies are crying. Now what do you think that was about? What did I as a 2-month-old know about Nazis or Hitler or genocide? What was I reacting to? The stress of my mother. Infants pick up on the stress of their mothers. And the infant learns very quickly that if the mother is so stressed already, that if I add more stress to it, that might threaten my relationship with her, because she'll be even more unhappy. Then the infant will learn to suppress their own pain, simply to maintain their relationship. Now, that's not a mother's desire ever to give that message to an infant, but we do automatically and unconsciously. That's just how it works. And that becomes a memory, and I'll talk to you more about those memories later, but it becomes a memory without recall. I don't recall that time in my life, but the memories in my body. And my friend Servas, who works with bodies a lot, he sees the body memories in the way people stand, or they hold themselves, or the way they walk. And we hold these memories in our bodies, and we're not even aware of them up here because there's no conscious recollection. So that suppression of my limp was a body memory of what I had to do to maintain my relationship with my mother. Now, the woman with ALS, the teacher, she was an adopted child. And shortly after the adoption, guess what? Her mother gets pregnant. And the biological child was the mother's center of attention. And the adopted child, from an early age on, learned, or at least perceived, that she wasn't loved and accepted and celebrated like the biological child was. And hence, she worked to make herself lovable. And how do you work to make yourself lovable? By suppressing your own feelings, by always being nice, by always taking care, and always ignoring your own needs. And it was purely unconscious. This is her coping patterns since she was a small child. She did not do deliberately. Lou Gehrig's father was an alcoholic. And if any of you grew up in homes where there's alcoholism, you know how it works. Is that the children, or one of the children, becomes the caregiver to the parents, emotionally or even physically sometimes. And that then becomes your personality. That then becomes how you live your life, because you think that's who you are. Because how we are as kids, we think that's who we are. That's not who we are. But that's what we come to believe, and that's how we behave then. And that's what creates these patterns. So there's nobody here to be blamed here. Nobody here to be blamed. It's just how it works. Now, why do these patterns translate into illness? And that's because, as traditional medicine has always understood, and as Western science has now confirmed, mind and body are inseparable. So if you look at the important systems in the body and the brain, they're completely connected. So that the emotional centers in the brain are connected to the immune system and the hormonal apparatus and the nervous system. Now, the emotional centers in your brain have one major role to play, to keep you alive. Now, what is the biggest need of the newborn, emotionally speaking, and even physically speaking, is attachment to the adults. Without that attachment, we don't survive. You can see that. This is true, of course, of baby birds and baby mammals, but especially of human beings, because we're the most underdeveloped and the least mature and the most helpless for the longest period of time of any creature on Earth. And I'll say much more about that in my talk on ADHD. Now, that means that our brains are wired for attachment. We're wired to attach. Big centers in our brains are dedicated to maintaining our attachment relationships. That's our biggest need. Those emotional centers in the brain are connected with the nervous system, because the nervous system warns us when our attachment needs are not being met, and then we cry. And then we get stressed. That's the that's the hormonal apparatus. And all that has an impact on our immunity. Because it turns out that all these systems, the hormonal apparatus, the immune system, nervous system, and the emotional centers in the brain, are connected by the nervous system into one giant electrical grid. Fibers of the nervous system connect them all together. So that anything that happens in one aspect of that system happens in the other aspects. So they're connected. So that electrical fibers or nervous fibers from the brain go to the spleen where the red cells are. stored, or to the bone marrow where they're manufactured, or to the thymus gland in the neck where immune cells mature, and back up to the brain. So there's a constant neurological communication that's going on in our systems, 24/7, every second, every millisecond. That's one form of connection. The other connection is by means of chemical messengers that each of these systems secrete into the circulation, which then travel to the other organs, so that the brain reads what's happening in the body, and the body reads what's happening in the brain. So it turns out that the immune cells in our circulation can manufacture every hormone that the brain can manufacture. So the immune cells in your circulation are talking to the brain and listening to it. That's the second. The third connection is the brain-gut connection. So let me ask you this question, and I'll ask for a show of hands. If you've had all of my experience, please just put your hand up. That is, that you had a powerful gut feeling about something, and you ignored it, and you were sorry afterwards. Okay, you've had that experience, put your hand up. Okay, just about everybody here. Now, why is it that the gut is so much stronger, so much brighter than the brain is? That, not the brain, but the mind, than the intellect, I should say. It's very simple. Because the gut is connected to the brain, in fact, the gut sends many more connections to the brain than vice versa. When the gut receives messages from the brain, it reads them, and it magnifies them and sends them back up to the brain. So the gut feelings tell you the whole picture. Your thoughts only tell you a small part of the picture. So people who had a stroke in the part of the brain where language is processed, these are called aphasiacs. They're much better able to tell when somebody's lying than the average person who can understand speech. Why do you suppose? Since they don't understand the words, what are they paying attention to? They got feelings, which read the body language of the person, the facial expression, the congruity of the mouth and the eyes. Is it really, when the person is smiling, is it just a mouth smiling? Have you seen a parliamentary debate on CBC? When the politicians stand up and they smile? They're grinning here, there's nothing up here. It makes you uncomfortable to look at it. Anybody with gut feelings would turn the TV off. Now, there's another large group of people, another large group of human beings who read gut feelings accurately and respond to them. And what do we call those people? Children, small children. Young babies don't listen to words, they don't even understand them. But they react unerringly and intuitively to gut feelings. Now guess what? When you put your hand up and told me that you've had stronger feelings that you've ignored and you're sorry afterwards because you believed your intellect rather than your guts, you told me the story of your childhood. And the story of your childhood is that you were born with the gut feelings intact and connected completely. But at some point something happened to you. At some point you got the message that in order to survive and to be acceptable, you have to suppress your gut feelings. Because here's how it works. Children have two needs. Infants, anybody, any human being. We have two basic needs. And the more immature we are, the more important the first need becomes. That's for attachment. And attachment means that connection with another human being for the purpose of being taken care of. That's an absolute need of the small child. Can't live without it. Impossible. So that's one large need. Another need, however, we have to function as full human beings is to be authentic. Authentic means that we know who we are, what we feel, we're able to express it, and able to honor it in our behavior. So we have the need for attachment, and we have the need for authenticity. So far, so good. But what happens if in order to attach, we have to suppress our authenticity? Because our parents can't handle who we are, because they can't handle our anger as 2-year-olds, because they can't handle our expression of our needs, because they're too stressed, they're too needy, like my mother was in that tribal situation. Then we suppress who we are, we suppress our authenticity, and we suppress our awareness of our gut feelings, because the expression of them would bring us into conflict with our caregivers and threaten our attachments. And so our problem as adults is that a lot of our behaviors are still coming out of our need to attach. So we're still behaving like little kids who need to attach and need to be liked and need to be accepted and approved of at the expense of our authenticity. And that, people, is what makes us sick.
The customer requested you hand them the order.
No.
They added the following
And fourth connection I didn't even know about.
Hand it to me.
But has
DoorDash?
described
DoorDash
in
now?
my book is the heart.
Oh, did you?
the
Perfect.
heart
Easy
itself,
peasy right here.
the nervous system,
There you go. Ding and then ding. Awesome.
that surrounds the
Thank you.
heart.
I appreciate it.
There's a
Thank you.
network of nerves which have predictive capacities. So when people say, especially for negative things, so when you say, oh, I knew it in my heart, you did. And that brain in the heart is a brain up here. So then basically, whatever happens emotionally and how we live our lives has a huge impact on our physiology, because these systems are not separate, they're just one system. So let's look at the question of how the repression of anger then might
fucking
suppress our immune system. Okay, so
Should've taken my time.
I'll ask for a volunteer here.
Nah, I
And
should've
whoever
taken
volunteers, things. One is that you might feel uncomfortable for a minute, the other is that you learn something about yourself. Okay. So any volunteer? Yeah, thanks. Right there. Stay where you are. Here, what's your name? Lorraine. Well, thanks for volunteering. Here are the rules. Okay. This is a metaphor or a representation of your life. You sitting in that chair. Therefore, you can't leave the chair. Okay. So whatever happens, you're going to stay exactly where you are. Other than that, you can do whatever you need to. Got it? Okay, so Lorraine, what I'm going to ask you is, if you're okay with me standing right here as I give the lecture. Is this comfortable for you? Okay, so I'm going to come closer now. Now, if it's still okay. If I give the lecture here, is that still okay with you? It's fine. All right, what about if I stood right here and gave the rest of the lecture right here? How would that be for you? It's uncomfortable. So what would you like to do about it? You'd like to step back and, okay, how are you going to get that? You can ask me, okay? You can ask me, I'm going to say heck with you and come a bit closer, okay? Now you push me away. Now you push me away, right? You push me away. Okay, very good. As you were pushing, what emotion do you think you'd be generating? But that's why you pushed me away, but as you were pushing, what do you think you'd be feeling? Not what you felt, but what you would feel if you're actually pushing me. What's the emotion do you think that'd be for? Exactly. Anger. And that's a healthy anger. A healthy anger is nothing but a defense of your boundaries. And basically, Lorraine, what you'd be saying to me is, you're in my space, get out. You're in my space, get out. But if you said that in the first place, you would need to be pushing me. Right? But the pushing itself, it's good. It's a good response. It's a healthy response. So, in other words, healthy anger is an expression of a boundary defense. So the job of our emotions. Now, by the way, if I was somebody else in your life, I'm somebody that, you know, we had a different relationship, you might welcome and close to you. Right? No, I don't mean me. I mean your child or your partner or whoever, you know, somebody, you might actually embrace them, right, in a different situation. So the role of emotions, basically, is to respond to, approach, and welcome the healthy and positive approach, and to keep out the unhealthy and aggressive one. So it's either I want more of this or I want less of this. So that's the job of healthy anger. That's the job of the emotion. In other words, it's to let in what's healthy and nourishing and to keep out what's dangerous and unloving. That's the job of emotions, basically. Now, what is the job of the immune system? Yeah, so basically, the job of the immune system is to keep out what's unhealthy, like bacteria, or to kill cancer cells. That's what it does. Or to let in what's healthy, like vitamins and nourishments and so on. If your immune system attacked the particles of food and destroyed them before you had a chance to absorb them, you wouldn't live. So that the job of the immune system is like that. It's been called the floating brain because it has recognition capacity, reactive capacity, and learning capacity. It's the same as the emotions. The immune system does the same thing as the emotions. Protect us and let in what we need. Given the unity of all these systems, it's obvious that when you suppress the one, you're suppressing the other. And that's why people that suppress anger, they diminish the activity of their immune system, as has been shown in studies. Or what happens is that the immune system gets so confused because our emotions are confused that it turns against ourselves. And that's when you get autoimmune disease, when the immune system actually attacks the body itself. Fundamentally what happens is one way or the other. If you don't know how to say no when you need to, your body will say for you in the form of illness. So chronic illness represents the body saying no when you didn't do it. Not your fault. This is how you were programmed before you had any choice in the matter. So again, it's not a question of blame or self-blame. But it does mean that to prevent illness, or if you have an illness, to deal with it more effectively, you need to learn to assert who you are and to say no. Now that might be difficult sometimes because the people in your life have got used to you as a yes. They've always heard you say yes. Some of them might not like you very much if you start saying no all of a sudden. And what you're going to do when you start saying no is you're going to find out who your friends are. Because the real ones are going to say to you, hey, I'm so glad you're finally saying no. And the ones that were simply there because you were constantly available for them are going to, oh, what happened to her or him? That's it. But so it'll create some conflict, which will trigger all your fears about attachments. So you have to learn that you are more important than your attachments. That wasn't true when you were a kid, but it's true as an adult. I'm going to finish with one story, and then we'll take questions and do a couple of little exercises for you. Gilda Radner, you might remember her as a comedian on Saturday Night Live. And she died of ovarian cancer. And I didn't know anything about her life, but I read her biography because I knew she died of cancer. And guess what? It's the same story over again. So Gilda Radner was a very unhappy child, and she was overweight as a child. And she was thin as an adult because she was bulimic. So all the time that she was a star, she was actually a bulimic. Typically, she didn't tell her mother. Her mother didn't know that she was bulimic until after she had died. Why? Because she was still protecting her mother. Just like I was with suppressing my limp. Her father died when she was 12, a loss she never overcame, and so what she did, she always got into relationships with men where she would suppress herself to fit the image that the man had of, that he wanted of her. And the only way she could feel close to her mother was to make her laugh. So guess what? She becomes a comedian. So many comedians, by the way, are very troubled people. And guess what? I have a son who wants to be a comedian. For good reason. And then she develops ovarian cancer. Even after her symptoms of ovarian cancer began to cause physical distress, including bowel blockage, Radner was more concerned with satisfying others than with her own needs. She stopped and received advice from sundry sources. For her dilemma, she writes in her autobiography, "Suddenly I began to wonder how to please so many people. Do I take magnesium citrate? What about the coffee enema? Do I do both? Do I do the abdominal massage or the colonic? Do I tell the doctors about each other? East meets West in Gilda's body. Western medicine down my throat, Eastern medicine up my butt." When it seemed she had been successfully treated, Gilda became a poster girl for ovarian cancer, featured on the cover of Life magazine. She was an inspiration to many, but the recovery was short-lived. Still attached to roles she had developed as a child, she berated herself for having, quote, let down others by developing terminal illness. I had become a spokeswoman for the wellness community and a symbol of getting well. I had been a model cancer patient, completely active in my own therapy. Now I felt like a living example that didn't work. I'm just a fraud, I thought. Only close to her death did Gilda finally learn that she could not be mother to the world. I couldn't do everything I wanted to do. I couldn't keep calling all the cancer patients I knew, and I couldn't try to help all the women with ovarian cancer, and I couldn't read every letter I received because it was ripping me apart. I couldn't cry all those tears for everybody else. I had to take care of myself. It is important to realize that you have to take care of yourself because you can't take care of anybody else until you do. Well, the trouble is you can, but if you don't take care of yourself in the process, you're going to make yourself ill. So the issue, of course, is not that we shouldn't provide care to other people. I mean, caring for others and being kind, that's wired into us as human beings. That's a true expression of who we are. But going along with that, there's to be self-care. That means that you must demand support. If you're caring for others, you must demand support when you need it. You must be able to have a break. You must be able to ask for help when you need it. You must be able to express how you feel. You must take time for yourself. There must be times in your life which is just for you. So that we have to find ways, amidst the role of caregivers, to actually care for the person here. Because if we don't, the result is burnout and illness. So again, it's not a question of being selfish and unconcerned. That's not so good either for your health. But it's a question of being as kind to yourself as you are wanting to be to others. It's kind of the golden rule turned around, you know. Do unto you, not just do unto others what you would have them do to you, but also do unto yourself what you wish to do to others. Any questions on what I've said? Yes, please. Yeah. Well, addictions is something a bit different. Addiction happens when we're stressed and we need to soothe ourselves. So when we allow the stress to wash over us and we don't keep the stress away, then we get overwhelmed. Then one way to deal with the stress is to become addicted. So that it's very interesting when you look at families with addictions, you also see a lot of illness in other members. So they just represent different coping styles. The addict soothes themselves to the addictive behavior. The person who doesn't go to addiction, they're good. They're going to go suppress themselves and develop illness instead. There's a question here, yeah.
That's what I was going to ask you about. A person that has an addiction problem, like I've seen this in people, they quit using their alcohol,
Yeah.
and afterwards they become like sober for like over a year or something, then they become chronically ill. So.
Okay, let me give you the mic so that people can hear you. It's a good question.
People with addictions, like maybe alcohol, they've been using alcohol to help themselves to self-medicate, but after that they stop using alcohol and knowing that their mentally and emotionally development isn't too par, they become chronically ill. Like I've seen that in a lot of people that I've worked with.
Yeah. Yes, you would expect something like that because if you look at if you look at the addictions that give rise to addiction, not there last night. Studies called the Adverse Childhood Experience Studies. They look at children, or they look at adults, sexual emotional abuse. The more likely they become addicted as adults, and the more likely they have autoimmune disease or cancer. So when people stop soothing themselves with their health, but they're not dealing with the stresses, then, as you say, they're not dealing with the emotional stuff, then the illness will show up. That will not be, not to mention that alcohol itself promotes certain kind of cancer. Other questions on what I've said? Yes. Okay, yeah, so I'll just get you folks with questions to speak to the mic, and that way everybody can hear you.
I was just curious when you had mentioned about not limping going into your mother's room.
About what?
When you had mentioned about not limping going into your mother's room, you know, there's other theories about birth order.
Yeah.
And you're the oldest in the family. I mean, can you isolate?
I think birth order, you know, I've seen, This chronic caregiver pattern, I've seen it in every birth order possible. It's not automatically a first-born phenomenon. I mean, sometimes it's the second child who becomes the good kid because, like with my two boys, with the first son, we had a lot of conflict because we didn't know how to parent very adept parents. So the second son pulls in and suppresses themselves more as a way of, I don't want that hassle, I don't want all that conflict. So he becomes a peacemaker. And so it can happen at any point. So birth order does have an impact, but so many other factors are playing into it, so I wouldn't isolate that one. There's another question, someone else? Yeah, you are, yeah. Yeah. Bulimia is a form of addiction, and it arises for the same reasons that addiction arises. What's that? Well, you know what it is? It's a buildup of tension and an urgent release. So that it's a way of actually self-created, it's a way of releasing tension. And there's that relief. So that addiction, I define, as any behavior that you crave that has a sense of relief associated with it, and which has negative consequences, and you don't give it up despite the negative consequences. That's what addiction is. Bulimia is an addiction. The best way to understand it is a form of addiction, and the causes of it go back to exactly the same factors that would underlie addiction. See, there's only one story. There's only one story. You treat kids well, they grow up to be healthy adults. You don't treat them well, they're going to act out their unwellness in a number of ways. And all the illnesses that we have, and all these diagnoses are just different forms of people manifesting early trauma and early distress. That's all. It's very simple. Yes. Anorexia is related. It's that helps leaves you completely helpless, but in this one area of life, that's how I understand it. And invariably, it has to do with relationships with caregivers, particularly mothers. I don't blame mothers because the mothers are just acting about what happened to them as kids. But with these kids with anorexia, there's always issues. And I know that like the singer Anne Murray, I think her daughter was an anorexic. And what I read about them, it is a self-depression on the part of the daughter. I think there's a lot of anger there that's being suppressed in anorexia, and that anger is being taken out on the self. That's how I understand it. There was a bit somewhere else. Yes, please. Well, first of all, I would say that nobody has a series of accidents accidentally. So that, for example, if you constantly get into accidents, I mean, statistically, it might happen sometimes, purely randomly, that you always happen to be where the lightning strikes. But overall, people that are accident prone, it doesn't come from the outside. There's something about them where they ignore risk, or they're unaware of their environment, or something, and that has to do with early defense mechanisms. I'll say more about that in my talk on ADHD. Which is to say that they're stressed. So it would not be unusual then for them to get cancer. But I don't think it's the physical injury directly that causes the cancer. I think it's more stress. And even if I had a physical injury, you see, if you had a physical injury, that's not the stress. You know what the stress is? Well, let me ask you this question here. I mean, some of you may not, some of you may wish to answer. If you don't, that's perfectly okay. But is anybody here willing to acknowledge, and you don't have to, there's no pressure here, that you were sexually abused as a child? If that's true for you, just put your hand up. Okay, very good. Thank you. At the very back, how old were you when that happened? And for how long? About a year. And in that year, who did you tell about it? Nobody. Thank you. How old were you when it happened? 11. And for how long did it go on? A few weeks? Okay. In those few days, who did you tell about it? Nobody. Okay? That's what the stress is. Because stress is not just what happens to us, it's how we process it. What you should have had to been able to do was to scream and yell as soon as anybody touched you the wrong way. That's what you should have been able to do too. It's just to scream and run and ask for help. The fact that you didn't is not your fault. By the time you were 4 and by the time you were 11, you'd already learned that you were alone in the world. and there's nobody there to listen to you. So it's not that you made a mistake, you just simply did what any child would, which is to assess the situation unconsciously, and you already knew that nobody there was there to support you. And there, when there's no support there, then you can't express how you feel. It's that suppression of feeling and the non-expression of the stress response that actually creates the long-term chronic stress. So even if somebody with chronic accidents, first of all, there's reasons why they had them in the first place. In the second place, they may not have had the environment where they could actually talk about their feelings and be really listened to and understood. And that's what creates the long-term stress. So it's the suppression. That's the issue here. This is how we respond, without knowing anything about the particular case, but this will be a general answer to your question. Yes? Okay, now you got to really yell, or come to the mic.
Two things. One observation. Certain suggestions when we work with individuals and we go to have tools to, can they use words like self-adaptation or they know what is wrong with them.
Yeah.
But they say, why bother?
Yeah.
Some suggestions on how we work with them. And
Yeah. Yeah. Well, first of all, let me ask you a question, all of you. How many of you, just again ask for a show of hands, how many of you made New Year's resolutions this year? How many of you made New Year's resolutions? Can I see the hands? How many of you still kept them? Okay. How many of you know what it takes to have a really good life, in terms of nutrition and exercise and emotional balance and all that? How many of you know what it takes? How many of you are living it? Okay. So first of all, thank you. First of all, the person you're talking about is not that unique, are they? They're just like the rest of us. So what I would say to that person is, you know what? Listen to them. What are they saying to you? They're saying that they're discouraged. So just hear their, instead of talking them out of it, listen to them. Oh, you sound really discouraged. Wonder what that's about for you. You must feel really hopeless sometimes. You know what, even me, I know how to live a good life, but I don't do it. It's just very hard. Really listen to them. Make sure that they feel validated and understood by you. Then they can get past it. If you try to talk them out of it, you can't. And again, a bit louder, please.
second point is I don't have the means present for it
Yeah.
right now. Like, I think maybe it's time to change my field. But I used to be this person.
Yeah.
But I'm wondering, when I had trauma about 5 years of extreme trauma happened to my family, is that, and this past year when I started getting these present issue and pulses on my leg, and is there a timeline when spine starts to really affect your body, or, like several times to my staff about self-care, how important it is, and I've been doing that myself, trying to say, no, I have to create these boundaries, because I was wanting to help people, make them, that made me feel better, but then I realized that I wasn't taking care of me.
Right.
Is there any suggestions on really on how to take back some of that, become more stronger with yourself so that you're not in these things that you get off?
Well, let me tell you about a friend of mine who lives in Calgary. Her name is Shannon Duke. And Shannon is 48 years old now. And when she was 37, she was diagnosed with stage 4 breast cancer. Now, stage 4 meant that the cancer was already in her bones by the time it was diagnosed. At that time, she had 2 young children, aged 1 and 3, and married to a well-to-do businessman. She herself was a very high-functioning executive for Microsoft in Calgary. And then she's diagnosed. She had a perfect life, perfect marriage, perfect home, of course. And then she's diagnosed. And healthy, physically, fit, always ate well. And then she's diagnosed with stage 4 breast cancer. And she has a transformation. Now, she gets the best medical advice she can get anywhere in North America. She traveled to New York and elsewhere. She got the best medical treatment, and with that, she was given 1 year to live, because that's the prognosis. Stage 4, despite the medical treatment, chances are you're dead in 1 year. Now, a year ago in February, just a year ago now, Shannon traveled to the Napa Valley of California with some of her friends, and they celebrated her 10th year survival and her 47th birthday. And the transformation that she experienced was that when she was diagnosed and started paying attention, she realized that her life had not been her life, because she was sexually abused as a child. And her response to the abuse was, of course, as many children will experience, it can't be about the adults, it's about me. So if this terrible thing happened to me, I must be a very bad person. So I have to be very good to compensate. So you're the good daughter who doesn't talk about it, doesn't disturb the waters, the good employee, the good student, the good wife who doesn't talk about the husband's addiction issues, because that would again disturb the waters. And when she's diagnosed and she decides she wants to live, she says, the hell with all this perfection and goodness. And she confronts her family, her origin, about the abuse that she had endured, and she confronts her husband. And she starts living authentic. And she leaves the job, by the way, which wasn't her. It wasn't really expressing who she was. Now, 11 years later, the cancer is still in her bones, but it's completely inactive. But she knows that if she wants to stay alive, she needs to stay authentic. So that, I believe that many of these issues are reversible. I'm not promising a cure here to anybody, but Shannon really underwent a major self-journey. And she continues every day to work at it, and she practices her spiritual ways, which she ignored all those years, and she pays attention to herself, and she keeps clearing this stuff out, and she's the picture of health. Her and I give workshops together sometime. So that there's ways to get there, but it's a commitment. And of course, it might threaten the attachment relationships. So that's always your call.
I was curious about any correlation with the endocrine system, with a person that is either living with alcohol-related birth defects and trauma. So when we look at what you're presenting here about mind and body connection and the immune system, so you're speaking about a lot about the hormones. So my question's about if the endocrine system is not developed fully because of alcohol-related birth defects.
I don't know the answer. I don't know the effect of. I'm not expert enough to tell you if there's any correlation between alcohol effects and the hormonal apparatus, the endocrine system. I do know that there's a correlation between trauma and endocrine system. That's what I've been talking about, but I don't know the specific answer about alcohol. It's a good question. I may need to look it up. Are you telling me it's finished, or do you have a question? We got 5 minutes. Okay. Well, look. Rather than take another question at the moment, let me just ask you to take a couple of minutes and answer the following question for yourself. In what area of your life are you not saying no? I'm talking about where there's a no that wants to be said, but you're not saying it. Those areas are usually work or personal relationships, okay? And I suggest you just talk to each other. Just tell each other at your table, or a partner. If you don't want to talk, write it. But have a conversation with yourself or somebody else at your table about where you're not saying no. In your life, that would be a personal relationship or on your job, okay? Just have that conversation.
Of the adult population is at least on one medication. Quarter of women are on antidepressants. The rate of childhood is going up. Worldwide, there's this epidemic of distress.
What can we do about that?
So the first step would be to...
Dr. Gabor Mate,
legendary thinker,
celebrated speaker, and best-selling author.
highly sought after for his expertise on addiction, trauma, childhood development, and stress.
People pleasers, these are the people that tend to develop diseases. When people don't know how to say no, the body will say no for them. That niceness is a repression of healthy anger, and that repression of healthy anger has huge implications to your health. And when you repress your immune system, you're more likely to have that immune system turn against you. People who are emotionally repressed are more likely to get cancer. And emotional repression is one of the impacts of childhood trauma.
We interrupt this film to tell you we are getting reports that
The People's Princess is dead.
Harry was a traumatized child. All he's told about his mother's death is that it was an accident. Your mother didn't make it. His father touches Harry on the knee and says, well, it'll be okay, and leaves the room. This 12-year-old, nobody held him. And children can be traumatized not just by terrible things happening to them, but just by not having their needs met. By not being seen, not being heard, not being held. Those are wounding for a child. But into you, it's Harry. I had a gut feeling all along that I shouldn't agree to do the interview. It really got to me. I lost myself.
What happened? There's a question we often ask each other in flippant conversations, which we usually kind of brush away because it's the convenient thing to do.
Yeah.
That question is the question I wanted to start by asking you, which is, how are you?
Yeah. So that question is, for me, it brings up, two dimensions. One is how am I at this present moment, which is, how am I at this moment, which is all there is. I'm well. I feel rather peaceful inside. I'm very happy to be here with you. If you'd asked me 2 days ago, I wouldn't have said that. I would have said I was feeling somewhat anxious and kind of troubled, So, as a in-the-moment answer, I'm well, and I also know how to keep well as long as I stick with what I know. And when I forget what I know, then I can be very not well. And so the last year since we've met has been in many ways a tough year for me. Also one of deep learning. So if the question is how have I been, I'd say I've been up and down, and I've had real challenges that I've had to learn from. On my way now, I'm pretty well, thank you.
2 days ago, if I'd asked you that question, your answer would have been anxious and troubled.
Yeah.
Why?
I gave a talk on Monday night to 2,100 people, and I just didn't think I did my best here in London. And I thought, oh boy, I could have done better. I let people down. I allowed my self-judgments and self-doubts to really dominate my thinking. And as much as I think I'm immune to that kind of self-doubt, evidently I'm not. So that's what happened.
When you say you let it cloud your thinking, what were the symptoms of that? So you gave a talk 2 days ago to 2,100 people.
Yeah.
And you didn't feel you did your best. You went home that night. What was going on in your head? What are the symptoms of that feeling?
Constant cyclical self-criticism of I could have been more present, I could have been more grounded, more attuned with the audience perhaps. But there's all these self-criticisms which then are accompanied by certain feelings in the body, like kind of a roiling in my belly and so on. And that's what I went through.
And what was the remedy for that? Because we can all relate.
Drive northeast on
earlier
17th
this year,
Street, then bear left onto
also
Main
feeling in a
Street.
state of discombobulation. Just a few months ago, I did something radical. I did a 2-week total sabbatical from the internet. No cell phone, no emails, no checking on Amazon, how my books are doing, all this self-referential ego enhancement stuff. And it just really made a difference. By the end of 2 weeks, I was a different person. And so I'm keeping it up. And one of the things you learn is you start noticing these body states that you're in and the mental hoops that you jump through, but you don't identify with them. So what's the worst case scenario? I didn't do the best possible job. Okay, what's the headline in the newspaper? Human being fails to do his best on a particular occasion. What's the big deal? So it's a matter of observing all this stuff and not identifying with it, not letting it take you over as it tends to.
I was reading something that said when we
vocalize or share our stress, it moves it from the emotional center of our brain to the much more rational center of our brain, where we can kind of step outside of the video game and help control it, per se.
Exactly. Yeah, it's the midfrontal cortex of our brain that has insight and social connection and awareness, which so often goes offline as soon as some emotion takes over, some anxiety or anger or resentment takes over. The midfrontal cortex tends to go offline, and the more trauma you experience as a child, the more likely that is to happen. So your insightful capacities, the executive functions, get taken over by some deeper emotional dynamics. And so one of the benefits to me of meditation is it restores that executive function. So that I'm not taken over or too long taken over by emotional dynamics that just sweep me away.
For 2 weeks this year, you said you went off
Turn
right.
right.
Why?
Then 7,175 Yorktown Avenue, Huntington Beach, California 92648. USA will be on the
body will
left.
say it in the form of illness. And I can tell you hundreds of times people have said to me, your book has saved my life. And my response has always been,
7175 Yorktown Avenue, Huntington
the fact
Beach,
is, I'm quite capable of giving advice and dispensing wisdom that I don't follow myself. And that was the case. So I became quite stressed, and my relationship with my wife, Ray, became very fraught. And she said, enough of this gap between who you are there in public and how you are in private. So that was a big incentive for me, because we're coming up to our 54th anniversary, and on the whole, I'd rather stay married than not. Everything else being considered. But also for myself, I don't want to be that guy anymore who can speak the truth that a lot of people consider to be truth so articulately, but not follow it myself. So I just don't want to be that person, and that takes practice. And that's why I took the break from the internet. And what was interesting is, I had my cell phone on airplane mode so nobody could get through me. A couple times a day, I'd still pick up the cell phone, and I say, what are you doing? There's nothing on it, because it's on the internet, but the compulsion to try and get something from the outside, to fill some gap within, I just kept noticing it. By the end of 2 weeks, it wasn't so strong anymore. So I did it because I needed to, for the sake of my own mental health.
An up and down year for you, you said?
Yeah.
Is that the down you were talking about?
Well, I remember my conversation with you, and I think I remember you telling me that you had this goal of becoming a millionaire.
When I was younger, yeah.
When I was younger. And then it's when you achieve that goal that you realize that ain't all there is, that you're still left very much with your internal demons. And that's a very common lesson. I mean, there's 2 ways to wake up. One is failure. You keep asking yourself, but success is even more, because you think that once you get something, then you'll be happy. And so I thought, okay, well, geez, so this book, The Myth of Normal, bestseller internationally and published in 35 languages, I should be happy. No, the more I got involved with it, the more I toured with it, the more engaged with the outside I became, the more miserable I became inside. So the very success of the book, and it all just it swept me away, and I lost myself. So that was one thing. And I did this very long, exhausting tour. I wasn't taking care of myself. Then there was my interview with Prince Harry and all the frou-frou around it, before it and after it, and I allowed that to take me over as well.
Really?
Yeah. I mean, in retrospect, I can see what happened, but at the time I was too caught up in it to notice. So what I'm saying is that it doesn't matter what I know if I don't pay rigorous attention to what's going on inside, and if I keep looking to the outside to give me meaning and give me validation, then I can lose myself. And that's what happened.
Your interview with Prince Harry, how did that cause you to lose yourself?
Well, in 2 ways. One is, I had a gut feeling all along that I shouldn't agree to the way they set it up. The way it was set up is, in order to watch it, people have to buy a copy of Harry's book. I thought, this is not fair. 4 million people have already bought the book. Why can't I watch this interview? Would I have to buy another copy? In other words, I believed that there should be a free public service. I'm a part of 2 people who can have a very interesting conversation. But out of sheer opportunism, I agreed to it. So I didn't follow my gut feelings. I lost myself even in agreeing to the format. And afterwards, Harry and I both wanted it released to the public for free, but the lawyer said you can't do that because this was advertised as a one-time only event, and there could be a class action suit. So the result was that I agreed to something that I didn't really like. Not that I didn't like the idea of talking with them. I didn't like the idea of putting this behind a paywall. So I lost myself just in agreeing to it. Number one. Number two, then there was the incredible social media and British media reaction to it. That was, for the most part, so negative and so demeaning and so dismissive and so distorted that I barely even know how to talk about it. I thought by this age I would know better, but you know what? It really got to me. It really got to me. I mean, I can give you examples, but eventually what happened was that I was really in a negative state of mind. And have you read the book, The Fox, the Mole, the Horse, the Boy and the Horse?
I bought it last week. It's upstairs in my bag.
Wonderful. So great. It's a great little book. Great big book. Although very few words in it, mostly just these wonderful drawings. Charlie McKeesy, he was really channeling wisdom in that book. And the horse is the most grounded of the 4 characters, of the 4 friends. And he's asked, what's the most courageous things you've ever said? And the horse says, help. So it's so difficult to ask for help. But I did. in the middle of all this frou-frou and my upset. And I called a friend of mine, a psychiatrist, and I said, I'm just in a bad state. And he said, what's going on for you? And I said, well, there's all this bad press and all the social media distortion of who I am and my motives. He said, what is it about that bothers you so much? And I said, not being seen. Not being seen is one of the needs of the child. But he said to me, okay, look, Gabor, when you're an infant, you're not being seen for who you are as a human being, almost cost you your life, which it did. As soon as he said that, I said, yeah, this isn't about the present. This is an old unresolved, not yet fully resolved wound. Age 79, I'm still upset at not being seen. I don't care if people agree with me or if you shoot my ideas, but I want them to see me and what I'm actually saying, not some distorted version created by their own minds. And when he said that not being seen really threatened me, I said, yeah, that's what's going on. And then I could realize, so what somebody else says. I don't live in the British press. I don't live in somebody else's mind. Here I am, let them think and say what they say. But it took somebody to wake me up to that. So that's what happened.
You said you could share examples of how it got to you.
Yeah. Well, oh boy. They called me a stern, overbearing merchant of pain. At some point in the interview, when Harry was, and the other thing was, see, Harry really was a traumatized child. And when you read his book, you can see why. And people couldn't understand how this is possible. How could somebody so privileged at the very apex of society in gilded palaces be traumatized? Total misunderstanding of trauma. It's true. People have it much tougher in many ways. But as an infant, as a sensitive infant, to be born into a loveless marriage where the father's having an affair even before he's born, where the mother's a troubled, very sensitive, very creative, warm-hearted, but very imbalanced young woman. So Harry describes in his book, Spare, that he's 12 years old when his mother's killed. How he's told about his mother's death is that his father, then Prince Charles, comes into his room early in the morning and says, something terrible happened, there was an accident, your mother didn't make it. Then there's a few moments of awkward silence, and finally, Charles touches Harry on the knee and says, well, it'll be okay, and leaves the room. And this is how this 12-year-old was told. Nobody held him. Charles himself was only doing what happened to him when Queen Elizabeth went on an international 4 or 5 months royal tour, leaving the 5-year-old kid behind. When she returned to England, she greeted him by shaking his hand. And now, what I said to Harry was that even animals hold and touch their kids. They're infants, mammals, that's what they do. Because mother rats, when the baby is born, they lick their babies. And the way the mother rat licks the baby, this has been shown in laboratory, influences the brain development of the child. And those babies that get the right kind of licking, it's called grooming, they have better brains as adults than mature infants. They used to be put in incubators and nobody used to touch them. Then it was found out that just by stroking their backs 10 minutes a day, it promotes healthy brain development. And the great British American anthropologist Ashley Montagu wrote a book called Skin, The Human Significance of Touch. So I was saying that touch is important. You're not being held and not being touched was a deprivation. And I said mammals, monkeys. You know what happens when a baby elephant is born? This is fascinating. The mother, I read this in a book called The Evolved Nest, for which I wrote the preface by a wonderful psychologist called Darcia Narvaez. When an infant elephant is born and the mother goes into labor, all the other mother elephants stand around in a circle. When the infant pops on the ground, they all stroke them with their trunks. So touch and being held is so important for mammals. And I was saying, animals do that. This journalist, who I don't know what she was listening to, I said, if the wrong family treats like kids like animals. I said, no, I wish they had. So, I mean, the distortion is just laughable if I hadn't taken it so personally, for the reasons I already explained.
You need to take it so personally, which led you to call a psychiatrist.
Yeah.
A man like you with the knowledge you have that writes books about the mind and stress and the body and all these things, you must have been in a pretty dark place.
I was in a dark place, and I wasn't, but look, I'm a human like the rest, and what Charlie McKeesey says in that book is that the most courageous thing you can do is ask for help. It's true. There's that, I don't know if you remember the Beatles song, Help, I Need Somebody, and John Lennon sings, when I was younger, so much younger than today, I didn't need anybody's help in any way. But now, those days are gone, I'm much less self-assured. He's actually saying that when he was younger, he believed he didn't need help. But the reason he believed he didn't need help, that he has to make it on his own, because he was so traumatized as a child. His father left him when he was born. His mother left. He was adopted by an aunt. And Lennon grows up feeling abandoned, that I can do this on my own. I don't need anybody, And later on, he realizes, I need help. But actually, we're all born needing help. We're all born needing to be understood, to be attuned with, to be seen, to have our emotions received and validated. That's one of the essential needs of children, as I make the point in the myth of normal. And children can be traumatized not just by terrible things happening to them, but just by not having their needs met. By not being seen, not being heard, not being held. Those are wounding for a child, which is what the meaning of the word trauma means. So you don't need terrible things to happen. It's so difficult for people to understand that. They think for trauma, you need horrific events. Well, horrific events can be very traumatic, But you can wound people, sensitive people. The sensitive child or any child can be hurt just because the parents are too stressed and unavailable emotionally to really see them for who they are.
I've struggled with that in my life, especially being a CEO, I think. I've struggled to ask for help when I need it because you kind of see yourself as the helper. And also, I've struggled with the idea, maybe, I don't know where I got the story from, that people like me, maybe because I'm a man, maybe because I'm the head of businesses, we have to figure it out on our own. And the cost of repressing how I feel has become more and more evident over time.
Yeah, how so?
Just like, I think, when I was younger, I never experienced anxiety before. And then as I had more difficult moments in business where I tried to solve the problem in my mind, for the first times at like 25, 26, 27, 28, 29, 30, that I experienced like fully fledged what I call anxiety, where I just couldn't get a thought out of my head and I felt it in my body. My breath was short, this constant state of like angst.
Yeah.
And yeah, I just thought I could deal with it myself. I thought I could think my way through it.
Yeah.
Was that the hardest moment in terms of your own psychology in your adult life in recent times?
Let me answer that question in a moment, but let me ask you a question that occurs to me, if I may.
Yeah, please.
It's like with beautiful women. They sometimes have a very hard time because they can never know that somebody want me for who I really am, or they're just attracted to my physical features. So for somebody who at a young age becomes quite wealthy and successful, how do you know when somebody's approaching you? Are they approaching you because they want something from you or because they really care about you? I mean, that must be a problem for you, I imagine.
100%. 100%. You never really understand what your relationships are.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. So it must be confusing sometimes.
It is. And I typically fall back onto the relationships I had before.
Yeah.
Because I can trust those ones.
Yeah.
So I have the same, my best friends, people I spend my time with on my birthday, there's five people there, are the 5 people that were there 10 years ago.
Yeah. Unless, I think, we get reconnected to our gut feelings. Then our gut feelings will tell us what is real and what isn't. But the problem for many of us is that we get disconnected from our gut feelings very early in life. Like in this room of 2100 at the Troxy on Monday night, I think I asked this question, I always do it. Have you had the experience of having a strong gut feeling about something and not paying attention to it, ignoring it, and being sorry afterwards? Almost everybody puts their hand up. That's a sign of childhood wounding, because we're born connected to our gut feelings. No baby is disconnected from their gut feelings. Something happens to make us disconnect.
What is a gut feeling? From a physiological perspective, because gut feeling is used as a word to describe, an intuition or,
Well, the real gut feelings really happen in the gut. In the Western way of looking at it, we tend to look upon the intellect and the intellectual brain as the only brain that we have, but actually our brain is a far more complicated structure. And our heart has a nervous system, which is connected to the brain up here, and there's a kind of knowing in the heart. Sometimes people say, I knew in my heart, and they did, if they're connected. Gut feelings are what all animals possess. It warns them of danger or when it's safe and when it isn't safe.
Not in the brain.
The gut is connected to the brain.
Right.
The gut sends more connection to the brain than the brain sends to the gut. And the gut has more of the neurotransmitter serotonin in it than the brain does. So that the gut feelings are here to tell us about what is safe and what isn't. And when the brain in the gut and the brain in the heart and the brain up here in the head are connected, then we're grounded and present and very alert and very aware of what's going on. But when childhood trauma interferes with those connections, which it does, then we start to just work from up here, and we can think we can figure things just from up here. But actually, when you think about human beings, where did we evolve? We evolved for millions of years out in nature. How long does any creature in nature survive if they don't pay attention to their gut feelings? So to go back to your question about me, I really used to believe, into my 40s, that everybody else could be stressed, but I couldn't be. And it's like you and your anxiety. I think the reason I didn't feel the stress because I had coping mechanisms, like working hard and getting people's attention or using my smarts and having status and all this kind of stuff, Then that broke down. I realized I could be stressed like everybody else, but literally I had this belief, and it's almost unbelievable to me now that I used to believe that everybody else could be stressed, but I couldn't be.
That's what I thought.
Yeah.
Your wife, when you went through that dark moment, if I was her, what would I have observed?
Well, first of all, and I talk about this in the Myth of Normal, and Ray, my wife, came on stage at the Troxy on Monday night and talked about this. I asked her to. Women have 80% of autoimmune disease in this society. So that disease where the immune system attacks the body happens to women much more than to men. Things like rheumatoid arthritis, systemic lupus, chronic fatigue, fibromyalgia, inflammatory disease of the gut, and so on. Why? So those diseases tend to happen to people, not just according to my own observation, although it's very much my own observation. When I was working in family practice and palliative care, before I did addiction medicine, I noticed that who got sick and who didn't wasn't accidental. That's the subject of my book, When the Body Says No. And then again, in the Myth of Normal, people tended to be compulsively concerned with the emotional needs of others rather than their own, identified with duty, role, and responsibility, so they work in the world rather than their own true selves. They tended to suppress healthy anger, so they tend to be very, very nice and peacemakers. and they tended to believe that they're responsible for how other people feel, and that they must never disappoint anybody. Two fatal beliefs. So these are the people that, according to my observation, but according to a whole lot of research as well, that I didn't even know about, but have since found, elegant research. These are the people that tend to develop autoimmune disease. Now, in this society, which gender is more acculturated, programmed to suppress their healthy anger, to be the peacemakers, to be the caregivers? Women. This is a function of a reality that a lot of people deny, but it's a patriarchal society, which we can talk about, but it's not a conspiracy. It's just how it works. So me in my marriage, I expect my wife to absorb my stresses. And if I'm unhappy, guess who I blame? And who do I take it out on? So she would experience somebody who's can be hostile for no reason and blaming, and she has to walk on eggshells. No, thank God she's not the type to do that for too long. And at some point she'll call my bluff, and then I either wake up or she says, "Thank you very much, but enough of this," you know. And so she would experience somebody who's irritable and unreasonably blaming and not taking care of their own needs, and then expecting her to take care of them for me. And we both had to grow up. But she was programmed that way as a child. Her parents had a lot of problems, and she became the peacemaker and a caregiver emotionally. And then she carries that role into her marriage with me. And here's what the bad news is for people. We always marry somebody at the same level of emotional development or trauma resolution as we are. So when we met, we were two traumatized people, not even realizing it. And then we played out our traumas. And I played it out in the typical male way, which is to be aggressive and demanding and resentful if she wasn't around to mother me. And that's how she would have seen. And this dynamic can still arise, except when it does, she puts a stop to it right away. And I have the grace and the wisdom by now to understand, yeah, I'm doing it again. In fact, I haven't done it since then, because I just don't want to be that guy. You know? But that's what she would have seen.
And what was going on inside your head? Were you anxious? Were you depressed?
I was anxious, and then I want her soothing. I want her, how should I say this? There's an interesting sexual dynamic between men and women, that men very often unconsciously expect their women to mother them, to give them the mothering that they didn't fully receive as kids. And the women take on that role because they're acculturated in the society to do that. But then what happens sexually? No healthy guy wants to sleep with his mother, and no healthy woman wants to sleep with her son. So that the ardor and the passion kind of drains out because of this unconscious dynamic of women mothering men and men demanding that they do. So then I become frustrated. And then who do I blame for that? I blame her, rather than looking at how did I contribute how did I help create this situation? So all that stuff played out in our marriage, and we've had to learn a lot from what didn't work.
In my relationship, when I was most anxious, it's also when my relationship nearly ended with my partner, because, like you said, I inadvertently took it out on her because I felt that she should understand how I'm feeling and basically adapt to me.
Exactly.
And she didn't, and so there was conflict because I felt like she was misunderstanding me and wasn't like acting in the right way to meet the needs that I had. Like she couldn't understand, and so that I think I wore her down. And then there was kind of like, as you say, that ultimatum moment where she's basically saying, "Listen, shall I just go?"
Yeah, and what you probably didn't do, and what I didn't do for a long time, is just to go to her and say, "You know what, I'm feeling anxious."
Yeah, that's what happened after.
And I'm feeling unsettled, and I realized that I had resentful feelings towards you. You know, instead of owning it, we acted out.
Yeah.
And then why don't they understand us? Yeah. You know, and actually, so what we're actually demanding is that we can be children emotionally, and they be the mothers who, without any effort on our part, will understand and see us. You know, and this is a strong dynamic in men-female relationships. And what tends to happen is that women at some point get to, if they're healthy enough. Now, if they're not strong enough to assert themselves, you know what happens? They get sick. And this is a mouthful, but a lot of women's cancers and autoimmune diseases are precisely because of this self-repression. And I could talk about that at great length, the physiology of it. But either the body will somehow say no for them. That's why women are much more likely to be on antidepressants, because they're taking the medication for both of them. You know, and so either the woman gets ill somehow, or she asserts herself and says, "I'm not doing this anymore." At which point, the guy will go seeking a younger mother who's not yet mature enough to assert herself. And this happens all the time in relationships.
The cost of self-repression, the cost of sort of emotional repression. I think everybody is guilty at some point in their life of repressing their emotions. I think men do it a lot as well. I mean, if you look at suicidality in the UK,
men tend to act it out on themselves like that. Yeah.
What is the cost of self-repression? You talked about the physiological mechanism of what's going on when we repress our emotions and how we feel.
It's been well studied, not just by me, but others, and documented, that repression of healthy anger disturbs the immune system. Now, why should that be the case? Now, healthy anger is simply when somebody is intruding on your space and they won't resist. You say, "You're in my space, get out." That's healthy anger. It's in the moment. When it's done its job, it's finished with. It's different from chronic rage, which is a whole other thing. No, in other words, anger is a boundary defense. That's all it is. Animals do it. Get out of my space. You know, no. The emotional system in general has the job, the human emotional system in general has the role of allowing in what is nurturing and loving and healthy and welcome, and to keep out what isn't. That's the job of the emotional system. Let me ask you a trick question. What's the job of the immune system? Okay, I'll answer. It's to keep out what is unhealthy and unwelcome and toxic, and to let in what is nurturing and healthy. So the immune system is like, it's been called a floating brain. It is memory, it is reactive capacity, and it allows in nutrients and vitamins and healthy bacteria, and keeps out and destroys what isn't, toxins and unhealthy invading organisms and so on. In other words, the immune system and the emotional system are exactly the same role. That's the first point. The second point is they're not separate systems. Physiologically speaking, the emotional system, the nervous system, hormonal apparatus, and the immune system are all one system. And there's a whole new science, when I say new, 60, 70, 80 years old, called psycho and neuroimmunology, that studies the unity. So it's not even that all these things are connected, they're one. So therefore, when you're suppressing one aspect of it, you're also suppressing the other. So people that repress healthy anger, they have diminished immune activity. This has been demonstrated. So the repression of emotions has a physiological function. And when you repress your immune system, you're more likely to have that immune system turn against you or to fail you when it comes to malignancy. The immune system, like you and I have cancer cells in our bodies probably every day because nature makes mistakes. That's not a problem. The immune system recognizes them as cancer cells don't have on their surfaces markers that our normal cells do. So the immune system says, this is a foreigner, it's an enemy, I'm going to destroy it. But when you repress your emotions, you can also undermine your immune system, and now your immune system will not recognize the malignancy and not destroy it, and allows it to proliferate. There was a British surgeon in the 1960s who operated on, am I talking too much?
No, you're not. There's no such thing on this podcast.
Okay. Because I just get so passionate about this stuff. And the reason I get so passionate about it is because it's so important in healing, and we as physicians could do so much more for people if we understood these scientific facts, but we don't as a profession. Anyway, there's a British thoracic surgeon called David Kisson in the 1960s who noticed what I noticed in my practice, that people emotionally repressed are more likely to get lung cancer. Now, it's true that most people who get lung cancers are smokers, but out of 100 smokers, only about 10 or 15 get lung cancer, which doesn't mean that smoking isn't the major contributor to lung cancer. It is. But he found that it was those of his patients that were emotionally repressed that were likely to get the lung cancer as a result of the smoking. And the more repressed they were, the less smoking they had to do in order to get lung cancer. This guy noticed this in the 1960s. So emotional repression has huge implications physiologically. And emotional repression is one of the impacts of childhood trauma.
Why?
The child is born with some fundamental needs. One of them, as I've articulated earlier, is for attachment, for closeness, proximity, unconditional loving acceptance by caring adults. Not just a human child. All mammalian children have that need. Without that, they don't survive. So that's called attachment. Seeking of closeness and proximity for the purpose of being taken care of or to take care of the other. And our brains are wired for attachment. We have circuits in our brain dedicated to the attachment relationships. And that's so important all through our lives, but especially when we're infants and young children. Now, but we have another need. We've already talked about it. I just haven't named it. The other need is for authenticity, which is to be ourselves, connected to our bodies and our gut feelings. Because again, without access to our gut feelings, we don't survive out there in nature, where we evolved and where we lived until 15,000 years ago. And so that authenticity is very important, to be connected to yourself so that you know when you're safe and when you're not. You know what you want and what you don't want. You know how to say no when you don't want something. You know how to say yes when you do. That's authenticity, auto to self, being ourselves. And to go back to Harry, his challenge all his life was that he wasn't allowed to be authentic. He had to play a certain role and fit into a certain set of expectations of how to be and who to be. And he could never figure out who am I really, in that context. But that's so general. So many of us face that challenge of who are we really, who are we authentically, as opposed to what's expected of us. Now, so we have these two needs. Attachment on the one hand, authenticity on the other. Ideally, the two are not in conflict. Ideally, you can be in a relationship, or I can be in a relationship where we can be ourselves and be accepted and connected with. And that's ideal all our lives. But what happens to a young child where if they're authentic, they're not accepted? So for example, certain psychologists recommend that angry children should be punished for their anger, rather than their anger being understood as to what it's all about and the child being taught different ways to express it. They just to be punished for it, and by different ways. By the way, if you're a parent of a 2-year-old and if you don't frustrate your child, you're probably not doing a good job, because the 2-year-old may want a cookie before dinner, and you say no, cookie before dinner. Cookie, in a minute they're throwing a tantrum, because what do even adults do when they're frustrated? They throw tantrums. Children, that's just what they do. They have no self-regulation yet. So the 2-year-old gets upset. Now you punish them. You give them a message: you're not acceptable to me when you're angry. You have to be a certain way for me to accept you. Well, you mustn't be sad. Cheer up. What's wrong with you? So when children are given this message of conditionality, that you're acceptable to me only if you behave in ways that I approve of, otherwise the attachment relationship is threatened, then the child is faced with this choice, which is not a choice at all. Do I stay attached to my parents? If my father's an alcoholic, and the only way I can find acceptance is by repressing my emotions and not show my sadness and my fear. And do I show my sadness and my fear or my anger? Or do I threaten the relationship? Well, there's no choice at all. The child will choose the attachment. And therefore they give up connection to themselves, which is the essence of trauma. That disconnection from ourselves, not in my own words, in the words of other trauma theorists who I agree with, the worst aspect of trauma is the disconnection from ourselves. And we do that for the sake of maintaining attachments, which means for the rest of our lives, we'll be afraid to be ourselves.
Is this what they call people pleasers?
People, exactly. So Sheryl Crow, the American singer and musician, developed breast cancer. And she said that since my breast cancer, I've been a different person. Until then, I was always trying to please others. And now, and there used to be voices in my head that were always telling me that I was wrong. I don't listen to them anymore. So that people pleasers are the ones who gave up, not by conscious choice, but as a matter of survival, their authenticity in order to stay liked and accepted and attached to it. But then they carry that on in the rest of their lives. And they're at risk. I always worry for the very nice people.
I think this is fascinating. I looked at the back end of our YouTube channel, and it says that since this channel started, 69.9% of you that watch it frequently haven't yet hit the subscribe button. So, I have a favor to ask you. If you've ever watched this channel and enjoyed the content, if you're enjoying this episode right now, please can I ask a small favor? Please hit the subscribe button. Helps this channel more than I can explain, and I promise, if you do that, to return the favor, we will make the show better and better and better and better and better. That's the promise I'm willing to make you if you hit the subscribe button. Do we have a deal? You always worry for the very nice people.
Yeah.
You talk a lot about that in When the Body Says No.
Yeah.
Why is being nice a potential risk to one's health?
Well, there's two places to be very nice from. One is just genuine human compassion and concern for others, but you're still grounded in yourself. That's great. But a lot of people are very nice because they are afraid not to be. Because they weren't liked who they were, they weren't loved for who they were. Being nice was their way of getting the love and the attention they needed. Let me tell you a story. In 1870, there was a French neurologist called Jean-Martin Charcot, who was the first one to describe multiple sclerosis, which is an inflammation of the nervous system, very debilitating. And Charcot said, in 1870, without any scientific research, but just from his own observation, that this was a stress-driven disease. Okay? Now, since then, there's been a lot of research to show how stress and trauma potentiate multiple sclerosis. It's not even controversial. Not that any neurologist knows that. They don't get taught this stuff in medical school. But the research is there, and I present it in my books. In any case, when I was writing When the Body Says No, a self-help group of multiple sclerosis patients phoned me and said, would you come and talk to us? Because I understand you're working on stress and illness. And I said, yeah, sure, I'll come and talk to you. And there's about 25 people in the group. This is in Vancouver, Canada. And I gave them very tentatively, apologetically, I said, look, I don't know this for sure. The sense I get from my work in family practice and palliative care is that the people that develop your condition and other conditions tend to be people pleasers. They tend to have difficulty saying no. They tend to be very nice people. And I said, I'm sorry if I've offended you. I don't mean to. I'm just giving you something very tentative. I haven't done the research yet. I'm just giving you my observations. They said, you just described us. And they all said that. And there's a woman who says, in the group who says, I don't even know how to say no. I said, terrific. Give me $100 right now. She says, well, I don't have $100 with me right now. I said, it's not a problem. I said, outside this building, there's an ATM machine. We can go in, after the meeting, we can go out. You can get $100 and give it to me. She says, I'm not comfortable doing that. I said, listen, I'm just trying to get you to say no to a ridiculous demand by a perfect stranger to whom you owe nothing whatsoever. She said, I can't say the word. Because in childhood, but by the way, when you have kids, you're going to find out what the word no means. Because age 1.5, all kids start saying no. They say that long before they say yes. Why? Because that no is the boundary defense of, I'll figure out who I am. I'm not going to accede to your demands. I need to figure out what I want. Put your shoes on. No. The parents think this is something wrong. There's nothing wrong. It's nature individuating the child. When families punish that, the child will repress the no, and the body will say in the form of multiple sclerosis. For example, niceness, ALS, amyotrophic lateral sclerosis, or known in Britain as motor neuron disease. Stephen Hawking was diagnosed with it at age 21. He was told he'd be dead within 2 years. He lived another 55 years. Doctors don't know everything, but there's been studies on ALS patients. They're extraordinarily nice. So there was from a Cleveland clinic in Ohio, a major referral clinic, 2 neurologists published a paper at an international ALS or motor neuron congress. Why are ALS patients so nice? And what they described was that when people came to their office for diagnosis, before they met the physician, they had underwent EDX, electrodiagnostic testing of their nerves. And the technicians who perform the test would write on the side of the test, this person can't have ALS, she's not nice enough. Or I'm afraid this person has ALS, they're too nice. And the physicians, the neurologist specialists said, despite the shortness of their contact with their patients and the obviously unscientific nature of their observations, invariably they turned out to be right. And then I called Dr. Wilburn, who did the study, and I said, what did the other neurologists say? When you presented this, they said, yeah, we all noticed this, we just can't explain it. Since then, there's been a study where they've asked neurologists about their patients, and the answer is, all our ALS patients are extraordinarily nice. Now, what the neurologists don't do is they don't make the connection. That niceness is a repression of healthy anger, and that repression of healthy anger plays a role in the onset of that disease. So it's not an accidental connection. So why do I reward very nice people? Because they're putting themselves at risk. Again, niceness can come from genuine concern for others, but that's not accompanied by an ignoring of yourself. You also care for yourself. Then you can be as nice as you want. But you also know how to say no. And you also know how to set boundaries. You know how to, and you know how to be angry if you need to be. But the niceness that comes from self-repression, that's the one that hurts.
There's clearly going to be a lot of very nice people hearing that, that know they're nice, that know they're people pleasers, that know they've experienced in their lives the consequences of putting everyone else before themselves.
Yeah.
It's funny, as you were talking, I was thinking about the person that I know who I think is nicest, and that individual is sick all the time.
Yeah.
And I just connected that dot in my head. But I remember making a joke to her about, oh, you're sick, so like whatever, you're sick a lot. And then also thinking, oh my God, she is probably the nicest. Nice is an interesting word because that can be misconstrued as like, hiya, or like, saying nice things to someone else. But it's really at a deeper level, from what I've observed in that person, putting everyone else before them, or chronically serving other people's needs before their own.
Well, so my contention is, as I said earlier, when people don't know how to say no, the body will say no for them in the form of illness. And for a lot of people with serious illness, the illness is the wake-up call.
Yeah.
And they actually learn. And when they do, that can make a difference to the course of their illness. Sometimes, not always, but I've seen examples of remarkable healing when people learn to say no and stop being people pleasers. And I just only wish that physicians understood this. So when somebody comes to them with chronic eczema and all these other chronic conditions, they will not just provide the physical treatment, but they will also talk to the person about how much stress are they taking on. It's very stressful to take on everybody else's issues and ignoring your own. It's very stressful. That stress is a physiological impact on the body.
How does someone who is a people pleaser, how do they turn that ship around? Because they'll hear that, but because their niceness or their people pleasing is so deep within them and it started so early, they're not gonna change. Most of them won't change.
Well, they may change if they get sick, and if they learn something from it. I've had a lot of people tell me that. But happens very early, but it's everybody's second nature, not their first nature. It's a very interesting phrase, second nature. It means that there's a first nature. Now, no baby is born as a people pleaser. No baby lies there, no one-day-old baby lies there thinking, gosh, I'm hungry and wet and lonely, but gosh, mom and dad have been working so hard, I better not bother them. Babies will express their needs very volubly and very articulately and very loudly. That's how we're born. We're meant to be born that way. So that this suppression of that is our second nature, and that first nature never goes away. We can always retrieve it, but you have to become conscious of it. So when the body says no, I lay out certain principles of healing. In the myth of normal, I actually teach this exercise. Ask yourself this question: where in your life are you not saying no? Where no wants to be said, but you're not saying it? Like, let me give you an example. Let's say I come to London and we're friends, and I call you up, hey Stephen, here I am. Do you want enough coffee? But you've been up all night helping a sick friend, or otherwise you're just too stressed, don't want to meet me right now. Your desire is to say no. But what if you suppress that no? You say yes for the fear of displeasing me or disappointing me or losing my friendship. If I say no, Gabor won't like me anymore. What's going to be the impact on you if you keep behaving that way? Physically, what's going to be the impact?
I'm going to be more tired, more exhausted, probably going to be more stressed.
All that.
Yeah.
You're going to be
disconnected from.
Yeah, exactly. So it's not this person. They need to. I teach this exercise in the book about where am I not saying no, and what is my belief behind not saying no.
I don't want to upset Gabor if he's going
to. Exactly, and I depend on Gabor's liking.
Yes.
Which means, as a child, you depend on your parents' liking, and you have to suppress your no to be liked. Thirdly, where did I learn this belief that if I say no, I'm not likable, or I'm guilty, or I'm not worthwhile? And the fourth question is, who would I be without that belief? And so if your friend does this exercise regularly, believe me, she can turn it around, but it takes some practice.
Who would I be without that belief?
Yeah.
When I put myself in her shoes, or I put myself in a people pleaser's shoes, I'm a people pleaser in certain environments, but I wouldn't say I am generally.
Yeah.
I can imagine someone would respond to that and say, well, I'd lose all my friends.
She'd find out who her friends really were, because the real friends would celebrate it. They'd say, oh, finally, we're so glad to see you being yourself. The friends that were just using her or relying on her to be their supporter unconditionally will turn away. And I say this to people: this contest between attachment and authenticity can be a painful one, but you can decide which kind of pain you want. As a child, you have no choice. As an adult, it's true. If you're authentic, you might lose some attachment relationships. That's going to be painful. But which pain would you rather have? The pain of being authentic and losing some friendships that were no friendships at all? Or the pain of losing yourself and all its implications and all its impacts on the body? So it would be difficult for her, and it's true, some relationships that she has now, they would fade away. But my God, she would also attract much more genuine and authentic relationships. And her true friends would really celebrate her. Now let me tell you something that just occurred to me, but forget it. There was a book written by an Australian nurse about 12 years ago. And this nurse, like I used to work in palliative care with dying people, she works in hospice with dying people. And these are people who tend to die of malignancy and chronic illness well before their time. And she wrote a book called the Top 5 Regrets of Dying People.
Where you were?
And you know what the top regret was? That I wasn't being myself. That I wasn't true to myself. I wasn't being authentic. That's the top regret of dying people. And the third one was that I didn't express my feelings for fear of disturbing or displeasing others. So authenticity is not just a new age concept. It's actually a central dynamic in staying healthy human beings. Oh, one more thing. So yesterday I was in Westminster Abbey, and I was looking at all these beautifully and articulately worded monuments to all these colonialists, to all the people that oppressed and murdered and robbed and despoiled Native people all over the world. They're the heroes of the British Empire. And I think one of the reasons there's such a strong pushback against the idea of trauma in this society is if we recognize trauma, which exists not only on the personal individual level, but very much on the collective level, the ruling elites in this country would have to come to terms with the fact that their wealth is based on the traumatization of foreign peoples, which incidentally was one of the crimes of Harry, is that he pointed that out. Let's face it, the royalty, the wealth that I was born into was achieved at the despoliation and oppression of people around the world. So trauma is not just a personal issue, it's very much a social and collective and historical issue.
What's the cure? You know, because many of us are byproducts of generational trauma, and we're seeking different ways to ease our pain through the means of addiction, whether it's pornography or heroin or alcohol. We can't all afford expensive therapists, but we exhibit those self-destructive behavior patterns maybe every single day, maybe with social media addictions or whatever.
Yeah.
What do we do?
Unfortunately, the healthcare systems around the world have very poor appreciation of the emotional contribution to people's physical or mental ill health. And most physicians and most psychiatrists are not trained in it. Unfortunately, there's a huge gap between science and research on the one hand and medical practice on the other. It's maddening sometimes to contemplate it. So the first step would be to educate the caregivers. Just educate doctors about the actual science of the mind-body connection and the impacts of trauma. Educate them. So when you go to a physician with, say, chronic fatigue or inflammation of your joints, they don't just give you the necessary medication, which I'm not against, but they'll also ask you what's going on. You know, so that's the first thing. Second thing is, let's prevent the problem. So let's support young families to be really there for their kids, so that families don't have to struggle economically and their parents are so stressed. As I may have mentioned, I've forgotten now, when parents are emotionally stressed, economically stressed, according to a number of studies, the kids' stress hormone levels are abnormal. And that is a harbinger of future disease. And so let's look after young families. Let's make people feel secure. Uncertainty, lack of control, lack of information. These are some of the drivers of physiological stress. So let's create a society where there's a more sense of mutual acceptance and communality and social support. You know, let teachers be educated that the kids who are so-called misbehaving are kids who are actually troubled because of stuff at home, and that the solution is not to exclude them or to punish them, but to actually give them emotional support in the classroom and in the schools. Let the schools be. The human brain, according to a Harvard study, develops from before birth. It's an ongoing process that begins before birth and continues into adulthood. The necessary conditions for human brain development is safe, supportive emotional relationship with adults. Let everybody who deals with children, from social workers to teachers to daycare workers to kindergarten supervisors to parents, understand the emotional needs of kids and provide that safety. Let the justice system, so-called, about which there's very little just. In Canada, 50% of the women in jail are Indigenous. They make up 6% of the population. 50% of the jail population. You call that justice? You take the most traumatized people who then act out their traumas, and then you punish them for it. So let the medical system, let the educational system, let the legal system understand child development and trauma. Now, in terms of the adult, to answer your question more specifically, so there's a social answer, but then there's the individual answer. Yeah, a lot of people can't afford good therapy, it's true. It's expensive, and then even there's a lot of people who get therapy but not getting appropriate therapy. Well, if you can't afford therapy, go to the library, read some books. My own, but not just my own. I could rattle out 5 other books you should read. Read Dick Schwartz's book on internal family systems called No Bad Parts. Read Bessel van der Kolk's book on trauma called The Body Keeps the Score. Read Peter Levine's book, Waking the Tiger, on trauma. Read Oprah Winfrey's and Bruce Perry's book, What Happened to You. Read Bruce Perry's book called The Boy Who Was Raised as a Dog.
I'm interviewing Peter Levine.
Oh, yeah. Oh, good. Oh, good. Wonderful. I'm glad to hear that. He's one of my mentors and friends. And we often work together. So this is, and all of these books will have some advice about how to help yourself, including my books. Then there's a lot of stuff on the internet. So this the interview that you and I had a year ago, I checked this morning, has been seen by 2.5 million people. I'm sure it's helped a lot of people. There's a lot that you can get just freely. Nobody's going to get charged on the YouTube. Lots of my talks are available. Lots of talks by other really good people are available. Do that. There's self-help groups of all kinds.
Is there a risk here? This is what the one side of the narrative sometimes argue,
Yeah.
that you can kind of over-traumatize your life in terms of over-labeling everything that you do as a trauma. So, and I mean, that always happens, right? When people become aware of something, they become over-aware, and they start over-labeling and saying, that's a trauma response, that's a trauma response, that's a trauma response. And they kind of live with a feeling that they are inherently broken.
Yeah, but my point is that nobody's broken. Actually, I talked about our first nature. That's always there. When people recover, it's an interesting word, recovery. What does it mean to recover? When you recover something, what are you doing?
Going back to...
You're finding it.
Oh yeah, I'm sure, yeah. That's the definition of the word, isn't it?
What do people find when they recover? They find their true self. That's what they'll tell you. That true self never went away. Nobody's damaged goods. Nobody's broken. To talk about trauma is not to disempower people, but to empower them. If I learn that my response to the British media and the Harry issue was actually it's nothing to do with the present moment. It's actually some old programming. Oh, okay, now I can drop it.
Are you glad it happened?
I'm glad that everything happened because everything is learning. Nothing in this life is wasted if you know how to use it properly. And so what I'm saying is that to be aware of trauma is not to lose power, but to gain it, because it's not an excuse. I can't keep going to my wife and saying, I'm being resentful of you and punishing you because my mother didn't take good care of me when I was a baby because she was too stressed. You know, I mean, that's lack of responsibility. But for me to understand that my demands on my wife to take care of me like a mother would of a baby actually is my trauma response, then I can drop it because I'm not a baby anymore. I'm not that helpless. I'm not that resourceless. I'm not that ungrounded. So that when you recognize trauma, it's not in order to use it as an excuse, but to actually to overcome it. That's the whole point.
When we talked about the suppression of our emotions and anger, you used the word healthy anger.
Yeah.
When you know, because there's a risk, isn't there, when you're saying that anger can be a positive thing, that people will then assume that berating someone behind a counter or a waitress in a restaurant because they got one item on your order wrong is standing up for your boundaries.
I've done it. No, it's not. So healthy anger is in a moment, and it's just a boundary defense. It's not outrage. It's you're in my space, get out. That's its purpose. That's its only purpose. Or to protect something. Like you want to see anger? Try and tell a mother bear not to be close to their cubs. You know, you'll find out what healthy mother anger is all about. You know, that's just healthy. The kind of rage you're talking about. Have you ever had that kind of rage?
Definitely on a spectrum. I've got. So the reason I struggle with the answer is because I've got a friend that's fully showing me what the extreme side of that is.
Yeah.
Where we used to call it the red mist with him, where he would literally lose control.
Which is incidentally what Harry used to call his anger.
Oh really? Yeah.
Yeah.
My friend, one of my best friends in the world, he talks about this all the time. Is you could trigger him by saying something, usually by saying he was wrong about something.
Yeah.
Or something like that, and then he would just lose it. So I remember the last time it happened was when the pandemic rolled in. I was staying with him in his apartment because of the lockdown, and I was living in America at the time, and we were discussing the virus. And I said to him, I think people that are older and that have certain health situations are more at risk. And he said to me, no, people that are younger are more at risk. And I showed it an NHS website which said no, people that are older are more at risk.
Yeah.
And he just went into this red mist where he was totally triggered and lost control of his emotions.
Okay, so if you observed him then, what you would have noticed is, remember what I said about healthy anger? It's in the present moment. Once it's done its job, it's gone.
Yeah.
Your friend, the anger he gets, the anger he gets.
Yeah.
So the rage just keeps building on itself. Now we talk about a fit of anger. It's a good word. You know where else we talk about fits? Is epileptic fits. In epileptic fits, certain electrical misfiring in the brain then recruits other brain circuits, and it gets more and more and more until the whole body's shaking, and the person may even lose consciousness and soil themselves and so on. That's an epileptic fit. A fit of anger is the same. That a fit of rage is the same. So that the more severe it gets, the more brain circuits it recruits. So rather than expending itself, doing its job, and then being gone, it actually gets worse and worse and worse. That's unhealthy anger, and triggering is a good word. Because look at what the word triggering means. Now if you look at a weapon, how big a part of the weapon is the trigger? This big. For the trigger to set off anything, there has to be ammunition there. There has to be explosive material there. So your friend is carrying a lot of explosive material. I can tell you, your friend never felt understood or validated as a child, and he's still carrying the rage of that. So you trigger him, and then by disagreeing with him, and all the pain of invalidation, all the rage of not being understood now gets triggered and recruits more and more brain circuits. Now I can tell you something. Healthy anger is essential for our physical integrity. That rage, in the aftermath of a rage episode, your risk of a heart attack or stroke doubles for the next 2 hours, according to studies. Because what happens? Your blood pressure goes up, your blood vessels narrow, and the clotting factors in your blood increase. So of course you have more risk. So the repression of anger can lead to chronic illness, but so can rage lead to heart attacks and strokes and so on. So anger is a delicate thing.
Shall I say something about my friend that we found out because he then went to a childhood psychologist
to
understand himself, and that's why I said that was the last time. So you can imagine that was 3 years ago.
Yeah.
The pandemic 2-3 years ago. He went to a childhood psychologist, and what they uncovered through their work was that as a kid, he was not only a foot shorter than all the other kids, but he was both dyslexic and struggled a lot intellectually. So the people around him and on his report card basically called him stupid as a child. And then he actually found I think he found a text message at some point between his mum and his nan where they were diminishing his chances of success. And he grew up with this deep sense of like, I am not intelligent, a deep, deep sense of it. And it's come out in all of these ways as an adult. And that, you're right. That's what was going on in that moment. I was challenging, I was taking him back probably.
Well, and you know what, again, to come back to Harry, that's what happened to him. They called him stupid and fickle and naughty. And he was none of those things he just had trouble concentrating and paying attention because of all the stress.
I think that's ADHD as well.
Yeah, and so in his book he describes that he'd been told he had post-traumatic stress. I didn't diagnose him with all this stuff. It's in his book. I said, you know what? But I think given how you were distracted as a kid, you had trouble paying attention, they called you stupid. This is ADD, and I wasn't saying he's got a disease. I was saying that was a normal response that you had to an abnormal situation where you were under a lot of stress and they made you wrong for it. They called you naughty. They called you stupid. They called you thicko. You're not any of that. Now the whole bunch of British psychiatrists got their knickers tied in a knot because I made that diagnosis. My God, people. I was saying to the guy, you don't have a disease. You have a normal response to abnormal circumstances. You were not stupid, ever. But children undergo this character assassination like you're offended. Can you imagine the rage inside him? So when you disagree with him, you're triggering all that. That's just how it works. Now, interestingly enough, people call me stupid. That's not a trigger for me.
Yeah, it's not for me.
Because I know not. I always grew up with a sense of my own intelligence. Not to overstate it, but I never had any doubt about it. But certain things you can do, like not see me, and that'll trigger me.
And for context, for anybody that doesn't know why you not being seen triggers you.
Well, look, I was born, I may have mentioned this last year, so I was born 2 months before the Nazis occupied Budapest. Then they started exterminating all the Hungarian Jews. So literally, my life was under threat because they didn't see me as a human being. They saw me as vermin. Now, not that I knew that directly, but my mother, can you imagine what it was like for her to have a 2-month-old and living under the risk of death all the time for a whole year? And then, as I mentioned before, she gave me to a stranger to save my life. And I didn't see her for 5 weeks. But that's not being seen. My father's not there to see me because he's in forced labor. So literally not being seen threatened my life. So no wonder when that happens now, that for me is the trigger. Now, of course, the answer is to see myself. If I fully see myself, it doesn't matter whether you see me or not. So if you see me, if you're not seeing me, if you're distorting who I am in your mind and in your words, it bothers me. It's only because I'm still counting on you, at other people, to see me because I don't know how to see myself. If I'm fully confident in myself, I'll say, gee, it's too bad. Steven doesn't see me. Well, maybe we talk about it, or maybe he'll never understand it, but I don't live in his mind.
How do I fully see myself? It's hard to do, right?
It's hard to do because when you were seen, it's not hard to do because children see themselves through their parents' eyes.
Yeah.
But when you're not seen, then you have to learn it. This is one of the things, to go back to meditation, that's not the only way. First of all, notice all the ways that you're not seeing yourself. Like 2 days ago, when I had this anxiety about how I didn't get my best talk on Monday evening, you know what? I did my best. It may not have been perfect, but I prepared for it. I put myself out there for 2 hours, and I spoke a lot of truth. Might not have been the best, but so what? But at that moment, I wasn't seeing myself. I could still lose it. So meditation, which is the form of meditation that at least I am learning, is about just noticing and seeing what's going on inside without judgment, for being aware. Let's practice.
And do you also suggest removing the things from your life that will stop you from seeing yourself, like social media?
Well,
because that can be a lot of...
I can't remove social media from my life, but what I can remove is my attachment to it. For example, I don't have to look at the comments on all my talks on YouTube. Who says what? Who likes it? Who doesn't like it? I'm not on Facebook. I have a professional Facebook page, but I don't administer it. But people go on Facebook, and who says what? Who likes me? Who doesn't like me? They can wean themselves off that. So we may not be able to stay off social media to write my books. Thank God for the internet. But I don't have to be attached to it. So it's using it, but not letting it use you, which is very hard.
A new podcast sponsor that I'm super excited to talk about with all of you is LinkedIn Jobs. Hiring, as I would know, is one of the most important steps in your business. Without good people, there is no company. Trust me, I found out along the way that your business is nothing without good people. You want to be 100% certain, though, that you have access to the best candidates available. And that's why you have to check out LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs helps you to find the right people for your team faster and for free. So when I'm expanding my team, LinkedIn is my first port of call. I'd highly recommend it. On LinkedIn Jobs, posting a job is super easy, and you can add a purple hashtag hiring frame around your LinkedIn profile to spread the word. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the qualified candidates you want to talk to faster. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/DOAC. That's linkedin.com/DOAC to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. As you may know, this podcast is sponsored by Huel. If you're living under a rock, you might have missed that. I discovered Huel's RTD about 4 years ago. Huel's RTD is basically a meal in a bottle. It is nutritionally complete. It contains 26 of your essential vitamins and minerals. It's got your protein in there, 20 grams of protein. It's got slow release energy in there in the form of those slow release carbs. It's just nutritionally complete. Not only have I got a good relationship with it in terms of health, but it saves my life in terms of those busy days where there's a higher probability of me reaching for something I might regret. If you haven't tried Huel's RTD, you can probably see it in a couple of supermarkets, but you can order it online and the link is in the description below. Let me know which flavour is your favourite, and also tell me if it ends up adding value to your life in the form of making you nutritionally complete on those difficult days.
The social media and all of these things, these stimuli, I feel like I'm concerned that many of us are living in a state of chronic stress, mild background stress.
Yeah.
And I say that a lot because the amount of times I catch myself, I spoke to James Nestor, who talks a lot about breathing and breath.
Yeah.
And the amount of times that I now catch myself very shallow in breath after just looking at my phone or thinking about something. Let's get my skin back into me. In bed at 1 a.m. as I'm trying to sleep, catch my breath being shallow. During this podcast, when I start thinking about something, my breath gets really shallow. Looking at my phone, my breath gets really shallow. I feel like I'm living in a state of like constant, subtle background stress.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad you mentioned breath because it's one of the, to go back to the question of what people can do for themselves, they can learn to breathe. And Eckhart Tolle, as a spiritual teacher, he says that rather than go to retreats and therapists, just take a few conscious breaths several times a day. I mean, not to dismiss the other, but that's more important than anything else. And interestingly enough, the Buddha, when he was teaching his monks, in fact, one of the Buddha's assistants, Ananda, asked him, "Oh, Holy One, do you still meditate?" And he said, "Yes." "And what kind of meditation do you practice?" says Ananda. And Buddha says, "Observing the breath." So in Buddhist meditation, and I'm not here to advocate for any particular pathway, and I'm not a practitioner of any religion, but hey, this is a very wise man. He thought awareness of breath is the most important portal into reality.
What do you think the antidote is for the way we've designed our lives to be constant in this sort of stressful stimulation? And because I was just wondering if human beings are supposed to endure this much constant stimulus and stress in their lives, and with chronic inflammation and all these kinds of things are now killing people at alarming rates. The diseases that are caused by inflammation. What can we do about our stress? And is it okay? Maybe it's okay.
Well, it's the norm, so you can say it's normal. Is it okay? Well, the question is to be answered by looking at what the impacts are. And what are the impacts? The impacts are very serious. You can see it on the individual level in terms of mental health conditions, as I said earlier, are burgeoning internationally. Autoimmune conditions are. But if you look at it also on a social level, there's more conflict, there's more division, there's more intolerance in our culture than there has been for quite a while. These are the impacts of the stressful culture that we live in. So is it okay? Yeah, if you want this, it's okay. But if you don't, it's not okay. It depends what you want.
Relationships.
Yeah.
Romantic relationships.
Yeah.
Thought a lot about the role that our trauma plays in our ability to form relationships. Obviously, society's changed quite profoundly in the last couple of decades. Different sort of gender transformations have caused certain mismatches and difficulties for people connecting. The world has gone very digital now, so dating apps run a lot of dating. I think 50% of people originally meet online. That's their first point of contact. Dating is very, very hard for people, and there's a lot of people that are kind of giving up on it. Attachment, dating, trauma. I've come to learn that we are mirrors. I think I found love in my life not when I discovered anything externally, but when I did a lot of work to figure out the barriers that were standing in my way of connection.
Well, you just answered your own question.
Oh, really?
Yeah. We can't form proper relationships until we have the capacity to be alone and be comfortable with ourselves. And the more comfortable you can be alone, which is different from being lonely, by the way, the more capacity to be allowed to be with yourself and to ground yourself in your own truth, the more likely you're able to form meaningful and positive relationships. And rather than asking me, a lot of people run into relationships to solve their problems. And there's the initial in love phase where everything is just ideal, and then reality hits. And then all of a sudden, that person who you're so infatuated with becomes your enemy, and you hate them so much. I've experienced such hatred for my wife over the years. And when I've been disappointed or dissatisfied, because I was looking to her to fill me with, and nobody can fill you from the outside. So once you no longer need it, once you no longer are dependent on it, then you can enter into a healthy relationship. Or, to put it more positively, a relationship can be a real ground for mutual growth. So you can enter into a relationship. You're not going to be perfect. You're never going to be perfect. Carry a certain degree of trauma, a certain degree of dysfunction, certain things that trigger you, as we said earlier. But if both people are committed to the truth, which my wife Ray and I have been, and that's one thing you can say about ourselves, for all the stuff that we've been through, ultimately the truth mattered more than who's right and who's wrong. So if you're committed to the truth and working it out, and if the fundamental love is there, then you can grow together. And so for me, the relationship has been the most important going ground of my life, not the therapy that I've had or the reading that I've done. Not that I'm dismissing any of that, but the actual relationship has been my most important schooling in how to become authentic.
Isn't there a real chance of a good relationship if one or more parties in that relationship aren't committed to truth and they're committed to being right or to victory? Or
it happens all the time. As I said earlier, people always meet at the same level of emotional development or trauma resolution, so that water finding its own level. But when one person starts growing and the other doesn't, it becomes impossible. Either the person that does the growing gives it up and goes back to their previous selves, which is almost impossible, or the other person is challenged to start growing themselves, or they're going to split. That's just what's going to happen. And again, to go back to the situation between men and women, this is what tends to happen. And I've seen it in my own marriage, I've seen it as a physician, as an observer of human beings. The couple are kind of getting along, but then the children come along. Now the mother's carrying energy has to go towards the children, where it needs to go. The father may feel now their nose is a bit out of joint, because now they're not getting the attention. And now the woman has a decision to make. Do I look after the 3-day-old baby or the 3-month-old baby, or do I look after the 35-year-old baby? And to the extent that the mother chooses to look after the 35-year-old baby, she's depriving the 3-month-old. A lot of women then make a choice that I need to look after my kids, and I can't put all this caring energy, mothering caring energy into my husband anymore. And then relationships get into trouble because the guys can't stand it. I've seen this over and over and over. I'm not saying it's universal, but it's very common.
Sex. In your practice, I imagine you've come across this quite often where there's a sexless relationship and that's causing issues. What is typically the true cause of that? That disconnect with intimacy, with sex in the bedroom? Because a lot of people are struggling with that.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I think today we jump into sexuality way too early. In other words, we talk about intimacy, but intimacy really means the innermost. And we tend to have physical intimacy before we have emotional intimacy. So that people jump into bed rather quickly. I'm not being prudish here. I'm not prescribing that you should only have sex when you get married or anything like that. But when we enter into sexuality early, without the emotional intimacy and the emotional authenticity, then the sex becomes divorced from our real needs. And especially for women who tend to, I can't speak of everybody, but in general, women want to have more intimacy emotionally. That becomes very hard. And if the emotional intimacy doesn't follow, sex becomes rather mechanical.
Becomes mechanical?
Yeah. So that's one big reason. The other reason we already talked about is sort of parenting dynamic between the genders.
Yeah.
No, I know we're only talking about the two major genders now. There's all kinds of gender variations these days, and but these dynamics exist in all kinds of contexts. So that when my partner is doing all the emotional caring, or most of the emotional caring, is this parent-child relationship, that really deadens the sexual drive.
You know Marissa Peer?
Sorry?
Marissa Peer? She's a psychologist. She actually said to me the other day, never call your partner mummy or daddy.
Yeah.
For this very reason.
Yeah, well, good. That's a good way to put it. I think it's because we put sexuality, in this society, of course, just glorifies sexuality. You know, and if you look at some of the most famous sex symbols, who were they? Abused women. You know, like Marilyn Monroe, deeply traumatized child, and abused as an adult by President Kennedy and just about everybody. And she was the woman everyone wanted to sleep with. You know, so that it's really distorted sexuality here. And for women especially, safety is so important for sexuality.
Yeah.
As we talk about frigid women, but when do people freeze? It's a fear response. There's nobody's true nature. It's just a response. And it's usually something happened to them or something is happening now. So that then unmelting can happen in a condition of safety. And then the intimacy, the emotional intimacy is there, which creates the safety for the sexual opening. And that's the dynamic in my marriage as well. You know, what my wife says? She says, truth is sexy.
Such a good point.
Yeah.
Is there anything in your practice that you're increasingly being confronted with in the last couple of years that you weren't seeing as much as when you first started?
What I see out there is increasing distress in the society, and people are more confused, and young people are just so challenged. And in the United States, the rate of childhood suicide is going up. You know, suicide. You know, more and more kids are being medicated for all kinds of conditions. In the U.S., 70% of the adult population is at least on one medication. A quarter of women, at least in the U.S., are on antidepressants or anti-anxiety medications. Those numbers are going up in Britain as well, from all the statistics that I see. So I see these growing manifestations of distress, what I call a toxic culture. I see that all the time. And look, I mean, the fact that this book, The Myth and Normal, is being published in North Macedonia, in Thailand, in Vietnam, and in Northern Europe, and in Eastern Europe, and it's just worldwide, there's this epidemic of distress. That's what I'm seeing. And I'm saying, people, either we can look upon this as some unexplainable misfortune and bad luck, or we can actually look for the actual causes of it in a way that relate to each other, in a way that we raise our children, in a way that we approach ourselves. And I'm saying that solutions are possible, but yeah, the world is getting more and more difficult for a lot of people. I do see that. And I don't think it's going to get better anytime soon.
You're not optimistic?
So, Noam Chomsky once said that when he was asked if he's optimistic or pessimistic, he says, strategically I'm an optimist and tactically I'm a pessimist, which means that in the long term I do believe in people. I mean, and I'm the same way. I do believe in human beings. I do believe in the human capacity to grow, to transform, to come to a deeper grounded sanity in themselves, both on the individual and the social level. I do believe in that. If I didn't believe that, I would just stay at home and read books and listen to music. I do believe in that. I'm optimistic in that sense. But at the same time, I think in the short term, it's getting darker and darker. And you can see that, so many manifestations of that. So yeah, I am optimistic. I believe in humanity and human beings. And I think we have a hard road to travel before we get to our better sense of self.
And I have to close this conversation by seeking some solutions. You used the word solutions there, and you talked about this better sense of self. We've talked about this from a social level, what governments can do to change education systems, and on an individual level, on a family level, what can I do?
Well, first of all, you need to define what your actual goals are.
Okay, so let me try. I want to do work that serves others. I want to do work that I find fulfilling and that keeps me challenged. And I want to
which incidentally serves your health, because it's been shown that people that live a life of purpose and meaning, they're physiologically healthier.
I want to be healthy because I want to do all of these things for longer.
Yeah.
I want to have relationships that are full and true and raw and honest.
Okay.
And I want to, I think that's it, that's the work and personal. And then I want to raise a family that is beautiful and pure and free of as much trauma as I can possibly make them be. And I want to be close to my children in a way that I wasn't close to my parents.
Yeah. Well, then the question you have to ask yourself is, what factors in your life support those goals and what don't? What activities are you engaged in that will support those aims? What will undermine them? And seek to diminish or eliminate the ones that are undermining your goals, and strengthen the ones that are supporting it. You know, that's what it is. And you know, and your intentions, by the way, are not only superficially the ones you articulate. If you want to know your real intentions, I have to look at how you live your life, not what you say about it. So when I was a young parent, if you had asked me, what is your goal, what's your intention, I would have said, it's the happiness of my children. I would have said that totally sincerely. If you had looked at how I live my life as a workaholic doctor, not available to my kids, always out there looking for being important and serving others, and you know, being at the center of people's lives because I was so essential to them. My actual intention was self-importance. My stated intention, the happiness of my children, as much as I would have meant it sincerely, did not jibe with how I was living my life. So what you need to ask yourself is, what anybody needs to ask themselves is, look at your intentions, both the conscious ones and also the ones that show up when you look at how you actually live your life, and bring the two into alignment. So look at, again, what serves your intentions and what undermines it, and look at that seriously. That would be my answer.
It's so difficult to distinguish between the two sometimes, because, I mean, on the surface, the system you gave there, actually looking at how I'm allocating my time, and is my time being allocated towards things that would further what I'm saying my intentions are, it's a very useful exercise to run. But, you know, as I said those things that I said as my stated goals, I do find a disconnect, I think. I think those things have been handed to us. When you ask them their goals, they will say things that will make the person asking the question think well of them.
Because there's one goal that you didn't state.
Which is, I stay away from the selfish goals?
No.
What's the one I didn't state?
Inner peace. Because without inner peace, you're not going to be able to serve any of those goals properly. Or if you were, you do it at some risk to yourself. And so, how would that be for you as a goal? Inner peace. And then, if running around serving others in the name of this so-called higher goal undermines your inner peace, then you're not on the right track. And you know what I'm talking to? I'm talking to myself.
Talking to me as well.
yeah. Inner peace is not a selfish goal. It's from a position of safety, a position of inner peace, that we can speak compassionately and truthfully to others, that we can serve our other goals. But, you know, Eckhart Tolle talks about our inner purpose and our external purpose. And you stated a bunch of external purposes. And that's why there's this, I believe, pardon the diagnosis, or the analysis, but that's why that disconnect that you mentioned. Because the goals that you stated were largely external. And what are the internal goals?
Inner peace.
Very good.
Yeah.
Now you have to put that into the mix. And once you do, I don't believe that. Now, nobody handed that to you.
I think this is the issue with workaholics, is we think that the path to inner peace is just by aiming at the external goals. Like I think maybe it's that's what I believe. Workaholics think they can work their way, or external validate, or trophy their way, or number one book their way to inner peace.
Because temporarily, when your book shows up as number one on the bestseller list, or shows up at all, you feel some inner peace. But it's addictive. And there's a wonderful physician and researcher, Vince Felitti, who studied childhood trauma quite a bit, and showing its relationship to adult negative outcomes. And he said, it's hard to get enough of something that almost works. And so, yeah, you can get that temporary inner peace, but look at the long-term consequences of the workaholism. It's not inner peace. I can tell you that. You know, I can tell you after long experience. It doesn't matter even how successful you're out there. We started the conversation with this. It's never going to give you inner peace. Inner peace doesn't come from the outside. That's not a goal anybody ever handed to you. That's something that you have to come to yourself.
You know this. How are you acting in line with what you know? Are you doing it well?
You know what? I'm not going to give myself 100% by any means. I mean, just look at this week. But I'm doing so much better than I ever did. And I'm so much more comfortable about it, and so much more comfortable about the future as well. You know, I am.
What is the one thing that we didn't discuss that maybe is the most important thing for my audience that are listening right now?
That, not that we should impose suffering on any children or anybody in order to teach them anything. Life will bring its own suffering. But when suffering comes along, there's two things we can do with it. We can try and just get rid of it, not to feel it, to numb ourselves, or we can actually learn from it. So suffering and pain can be big teachers if you know how to relate to them. So when illness comes along, when a crisis comes along in your life, you might notice that the Chinese word for crisis is made up of 2 character letters, meaning danger and opportunity. Really? So when there's a crisis, there's danger, but there's also opportunity to learn and to grow. And there's such a thing as growing older. In other words, not just getting older, but actually growing older, and actually still keep growing as you get older. And that growing older actually has to do with becoming more and more authentic to yourself. So sometimes I do that successfully, sometimes I don't. But that's really the journey, and I'd recommend that journey to everybody. You can actually grow older. In other words, you don't have to shrink. You can actually grow.
When you said the word growth there, it reminded me of something you said in a topic we haven't actually talked about, which I did want to speak to you about, which is vulnerability.
Yeah.
I remember you making this interesting connection. I saw it somewhere online between vulnerability and growth.
Yeah.
And vulnerability is a risk for a lot of people. It's always felt like a risk for me.
So vulnerability comes from the Latin word vulnerare, to wound.
To wound.
Yeah, that's vulnerare, to wound. And so, as human beings, or as any living creature, we're all profoundly vulnerable. From the moment that we're conceived to the moment we die, we can be wounded. We can be wounded physically, we can be wounded emotionally. That's just a given. When children are safe and seen and understood, they can accept their vulnerability because they have the confidence that they can deal with it. But when children are traumatized or not understood, not seen, and they're alone emotionally, the vulnerability becomes too painful to bear. So we shut down our sense of vulnerability, not to feel the pain. But when you look at life, nothing grows without vulnerability. So a tree doesn't grow where it's hard and thick, does it? It goes where it's tender and soft, and there's these shoots that are very vulnerable. They can be eaten by animals or insects. A crustacean animal, like a crab, cannot grow inside a hard shell. What does it have to do when it needs to grow? It molts and becomes this soft creature. That's very vulnerable. But without that vulnerability, there's no growth. Without emotional vulnerability, there's also no growth. And so much of our culture is designed to deny vulnerability and to shut it down or to somehow distract ourselves from it.
And what's the cost?
And the cost is that we stay immature and that we lose ourselves. That's what the cost is. So
I also think vulnerability is, and I've just learned this from doing this podcast, that vulnerability is a great connector.
Yeah.
Much of the reason why I have good conversations on this podcast, I think, is because I'm willing to be open myself.
Yeah. Which then allows your client, your guest, the safety to open up themselves. And in your personal life with your friends, I mean, you can talk about the scandal of Newcastle beating Manchester City in some game recently by 1-0. Which I don't say to talk about it if that's interesting to you, but which is more meaningful to you, that or when you actually share.
Struggle.
You struggle and what's going on for you. I mean, no contest. But so much of this culture is designed to distract ourselves from our vulnerability.
Yeah, we have a closing speech on this podcast, but I'll ask you a question for the next guest. Today's your last day on Earth.
Yeah.
You're allowed to make 2 phone calls. One phone call to the person you love the most, and the second phone call to the entire world. What do you say on both of those phone calls?
What John Lennon sang all those years ago. All you need is love.
And the phone call to the person you love the most?
To the person I love the most, I don't have to say anything at all.
Why?
Because you know.
If you were calling her on that last day?
I'd say thank you. For everything. And you know what? I may even say that to the world. I might even say thank you. For all the struggles and the travails and troubles and tribulations of childhood and adulthood and parenting and career and all this. Thank you. You've given me so much. That's what I would say. Yeah, I mean, if I wasn't giving advice, which is all you need is love, which is advice. No, forget that. I just say thank you.
How do you want to be remembered?
As somebody who did his best to make a difference. And who made a difference. Which I know I have, by the way. So, not that everybody agrees with me, but I also know I've made a difference.
What difference do you think you made?
How to say this without sounding egotistical? But I get so many messages from around the world. I mean, literally from around the world. That reading my books has transformed people's relationship to themselves and made them understand themselves. I mentioned maybe in a different interview that the best review I ever had of The Myth of Normal was that some young guy said to me, "Thank you, I read that book and I remembered myself." So my work, for those who are open to it, really helps to connect them to themselves and to see themselves clearly. And that's a gift.
In a world where it's increasingly hard to see really young.
Yeah, and it's hard for people to see themselves. And so people don't see themselves as broken or as irretrievably damaged, but actually for wholeness, which incidentally is the root of the word health, is wholeness. And that's the difference I'm making, is that people can see themselves not as broken and damaged, but as actually fundamentally whole with some stuff to work through. That's it.
We can learn so much from children, can't we? So much of your work brings us back to the first nature as you described it as children.
Yeah. Well, a lot of parents will tell you, and you'll find out, is that the greatest teachers are your children. If you will